After the divorce, my ex-husband found out I have a child. In the third year of Zhuang Zui and Qin Zan's marriage, on the day of their divorce, they finally had a delayed wedding night. Chapter 1: The Genius Researcher. Luo Ting Mansion. Zhuang Zui carefully tucked away her divorce certificate and packed up the few things she had left. Just as she was about to leave, Qin Zan suddenly appeared in the room. He looked at her with his usual cold, almond-shaped eyes and said, "Do it once." After a full minute of silence, Zhuang Zui placed the bag in her hand on the floor and silently agreed. It was the first time in 3 years of marriage that she had been this close and intimate with Qin Zan. As Qin Zan prepared, Zhuang Zui noticed a small mole on the side of his neck, seductive and drawing her gaze. She stared at it, lost in thought, but the words that came from Qin Zan made her body go cold. Qin Zan said, "Looks like you haven't been idle these past 3 years." Zhuang Zui's pupils widened in disbelief. She couldn't believe Qin Zan would humiliate her like this. It wasn't the first time for her, but it was not during their marriage. In these 3 years, she had never done anything to embarrass Qin Zan or the Qin family. Zhuang Zui began to struggle, but Qin Zan pinned her wrist down. She vaguely heard him mutter, "Since others can, there's no reason I can't." It was just a delayed wedding night. Zhuang Zui lowered her gaze to his face, recalling how she first met him. Her impression of him was that of a graceful, charismatic man. What fascinated her the most were his eyes, brilliant, like a starry river, shining with light. But now, none of that mattered to her. Shaking off her thoughts, Zhuang Zui picked up the bag from the floor and turned to leave the room. As she stepped out of the courtyard, a green sports car was parked across the street. The window rolled down, and a hand adorned with a skull ring reached out, waving at her. Zhuang Zui walked over, opened the car door, and sat down. "Got any birth control pills? Give me one." Kai Yi turned to look at her, stunned. After a long pause, he finally said, "So this is why you were 7 hours late. Shit. Qin Zan is really something. Now that you're divorced, he's trying to mess with you? What, some new way to keep you around?" Zhuang Zui shot him a glare and said, "Watch your words. If you have it, give it to me." Kai Yi looked at her helplessly. "Boss, I'm still a virgin. Where would I get something like that?" Zhuang Zui wearily averted her gaze, adjusted her sitting position, and said, "Then just head back to the research institute. If you see a pharmacy on the way, remember to stop." "Got it, boss." Kai Yi pulled a small box from under his seat and handed it to her. "Boss, happy divorce. Millimeter. Boss, it's great to have you back. Our new drug is in the final stage now. The launch schedule can be moved up. Millimeter." After her brief response, she closed her eyes, no longer engaging in conversation with him. His words had hurt her. Qin Zan wasn't trying to keep her, he was simply humiliating her. The car rolled over the road, roaring off into the distance. On the balcony of the villa's 3rd floor, Qin Zan stood, holding a cigarette between his fingers, his gaze fixed on the direction the car had gone. A cold smile spread across his lips. "Hey, Zhuang Zui. You're quite something." He snuffed out the cigarette, and just then, his phone rang unexpectedly. Glancing at the screen, he pressed the answer button. "Zan Ji, we've received word from Yixing Biotech. The genius researcher who was in charge of their new drug research has returned, and the new drug is about to enter the final development stage." Qin Zan pursed his lips. "Is the news reliable?" "Yes, it's true. Get in touch with their person in charge. I want to see this genius researcher at 10 a.m. tomorrow." Chapter 2: Research for the Sake of Nothing But Knowledge. Yixing Biotech Institute. Zhuang Zui, dressed in a white lab suit and protective goggles, walked out of the laboratory. Kai Yi, holding a coffee in one hand and a sandwich in the other, stood up when he saw her and approached with a grin. "Boss, you're too dedicated. You didn't even take a break before jumping straight into work. Do you have to be this intense?" Zhuang Zui replied, "I need to go to the hospital later." Kai Yi immediately said, "Boss, don't rush. Now that you're back, all we need to do is overcome the final hurdle, and the new drug will be ready for use. Once it's out, my sister will finally have a chance at recovery." Zhuang Zui lifted her eyelids and glared at Kai Yi until he felt uncomfortable, then said coolly, "That's my sister." Just then, a well-dressed middle-aged man walked over to them. Upon seeing Kai Yi, he went straight to the point. Zui, I've been looking for you. Zhuang Zui greeted him politely, Uncle Hua. Hua Zhongxian, seeing Kai Yi was present, didn't he beat around the bush and said, it's the person I mentioned to you before. He contacted me again and wants to meet you. Do you want to see him? Before Zhuang Zui could respond, Kai Yi piped up, isn't that the nouveau rich guy? He said he'd pay any price as long as we develop a new drug for him, right? Hua Zhongxian confirmed, that's him. Kai Yi turned to Zhuang Zui and muttered under his breath, boss, he's already come to us a few times. Since he is so eager to give us money, why not take him for a ride and earn 500 million first? Zhuang Zui's expression remained unchanged as she replied flatly, I want to meet him. The man was no simple character, and his tone was too arrogant. Yet, he didn't even reveal which illness he wanted to target. Apart from the compensation he offered, she couldn't see any sincerity in his approach. She had to be cautious. Her mother, years ago, had been too soft-hearted, and ended up being used by people. A kind-hearted person who focused on researching new drugs became the scapegoat for the deadly Baili village poisoning case. The tragedy, which shocked the world 5 years ago, was still being talked about, with images and videos of corpses scattered across the village still circulating online. At that time, Zhuang Zui had been preoccupied with the fact that she had slept with a man, whose identity she still didn't know, and ended up pregnant. She was in agony. It wasn't until her mother found her and took her to meet her for the last time that Zhuang Zui realized what had happened. But by then, it was too late to do anything. Her mother had only told her to hide the child after giving birth and take a letter to the Qin family. The Qin family would arrange her life from there. The most important thing her mother had told her was that if she wanted to avenge her, she would need to join the Qin family. It was then that Zhuang Zui was forced to put aside her grief for her child and go to the Qin family. What she didn't know at the time was that the so-called arrangement was for her to marry Qin Zan. Bringing her thoughts back to the present, Zhuang Zui met Hua Zhongxian's gaze, as he seemed ready to persuade her further. She said, Uncle Hua, you know my mother. The last thing she would want is for me to develop a new drug for the sake of profit. If I meet that man, it will be the last straw for her spirit. After saying this, Zhuang Zui turned and walked towards the break room without looking back. She had to change and head to the hospital quickly, or it would be too late. Kai Yi stood watching her retreating figure, opening his mouth. Boss, what about breakfast? He had waited so long, and still hadn't delivered the breakfast. He was so useless. Feeling frustrated, he kicked the floor and took a bite of his sandwich. Hua Zhongxian, at a loss for what to do, could only pull out his phone and call the man back to inform him of Zhuang Zui's decision. Chapter 3, Treating the Qin Family as Fools. Outside Yixing Biotech Institute, a convoy of cars was parked not far away. Cheng Wei hung up the phone and turned to relay Hua Zhongxian's message to Qin Zan. As his words fell, the pressure in the car grew colder, and Qin Zan's expression darkened further. Just then, the door to the research institute opened, and a slender, tall figure walked out. She was dressed in a white tracksuit, revealing a waist that was so thin it seemed delicate, her skin glowing pale under the sunlight. Her every move was alluring. The driver hesitated for a moment before turning to Qin Zan and saying, Zan Ji, it's the young madam. Qin Zan's expression turned even colder, and the driver, braving the tension, added, she just walked out of the research institute. At that moment, a car with the Zhongxian travel logo on it pulled up right in front of Zhuang Zui. By the time Qin Zan looked over, Zhuang Zui had already opened the car door and gotten in. Qin Zan's voice was icy as he ordered, follow her. He didn't know that his ex-wife had any connection to Yixing Biotech Institute. The driver immediately started the car, and even Cheng Wei sat quietly, no longer offering his opinions. Both men were thinking the same thing. If their former young madam had connections with Yixing Biotech Institute, then all this time, while they watched Qin Zan struggle for over a year without saying a word, she had been quietly watching from the sidelines. That was truly ruthless. 45 minutes later, the car stopped at Ankang Private Hospital. Zhuang Zui stepped out and walked briskly inside. All along, she had noticed she was being followed. Cheng Wei unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to Qin Zan. Zan Ji, I'll go check it out. To his surprise, Qin Zan had already gotten out of the car and was quickly heading in the direction Zhuang Zui had gone. He watched as Zhuang Zui seemed to be very familiar with the doctors and nurses there. She greeted everyone she encountered, and the bright smile on her face was something he had never seen at the Qin family. Especially when she reached the door of a patient room, just as a young male doctor walked out. She smiled and called out, "Senior brother." Jing Yuker's gaze softened as he looked at Zhuang Zui. He raised his hand to tidy up her hair, which had become messy from walking too quickly. "I thought you wouldn't make it today." Zhuang Zui replied, "I told you I'd come to get the data today. How could I not come? How is Yarn doing? With me around, you shouldn't worry. Are you doubting my reputation as a medical master?" Jing Yuker joked. Zhuang Zui smiled brightly and took a step forward, about to push open the door to the patient room. Just then, a soft, cheerful voice came from her right. "Mummy." Zhuang Zui turned in surprise, but the first thing she saw wasn't the child, but the man standing 10 meters away, staring at her with cold, piercing eyes. Qin Zan. How could he be here? What did he see? Her son. "Mummy." The little one had already joyfully run over, hugging Zhuang Zui's leg and looking up at her with gleaming eyes full of joy. Zhuang Zui instinctively glanced at Qin Zan, only to see him already striding toward her. Her heart raced, and her instinct screamed to hide her son, but before she could make a move, Qin Zan's hand grabbed tightly onto her collar. "Well done, Zhuang Zui. Not only did you cheat on me while we were married, but you also went and had this huge son. You think the Qin family is a bunch of fools. Chapter 4 I will make you regret it." Qin Zan was very strong. He grabbed Zhuangji's collar and lifted her heels off the ground. Zhuangji's neck was strangled so tightly that she could hardly breathe. "Sir, what are you doing? Let go first." Jing Yuker finally reacted and went to pull Qin Zan's hand away, but he was fiercely shaken off. "Get away, you adulterer. You dare to cuckold me. You are seeking death." Qin Zan roared. His violent appearance completely frightened Naichuanzi. Because she was holding Zhuangji's legs, she was lifted off the ground by Qin Zan. When she came to her senses, she couldn't control herself and burst into tears. "Wuar." Zhuangji grabbed Qin Zan's wrists with both hands, trying to make him let go of her, but it was in vain. She could only look at Granny when who came with the baby and asked her to take the baby away first. However, the little guy was so scared that he refused to leave his mother and held onto Zhuangji's thigh and refused to let go. Zhuangji had no choice but to look at Qin Zan pleadingly. There was only one sentence in her eyes: "No matter what, don't hurt my son." Qin Zan understood her gaze, and therefore, in addition to anger, an unfamiliar emotion spread and grew from the bottom of his heart. Before he could figure out what it was, it had already wrapped around his whole body like a vine. It is heartache, humiliation, unbearable and unwilling. Driven by various emotions, Qin Zan loosened his grip, and Zhuangji fell to the ground in exhaustion. However, she could not care about herself, and quickly took the baby over and examined him carefully. Are you hurt anywhere? Tell mommy." Zhuangyi shook his little head, put his chubby little hands on Zhuangji's neck, and said in a baby voice, "Mommy, it hurts, sneeze and it won't hurt." As he spoke, Zhuangyi leaned over and blew at Zhuangji's neck with his little mouth. Zhuangji's eyes instantly turned red. She wiped Zhuangyi's tears with one hand and gently stroked his back with the other, saying softly, "Yu is so good. Mommy doesn't feel any pain anymore." This scene of loving mother and filial son stimulated Qin Zan's eyes even more. He really could not imagine that his ex-wife had such a gentle side. 3 years into the marriage, she had always had a blank expression on her face when she was at the Qin family. Indeed, his mother didn't like her and criticized her in various ways, causing the Qin family to not treat her well. But was she the only one who was wronged in this marriage? He was also forced to spend 3 years because of an inexplicable letter, but she, on the other hand, not only didn't smile at him, but she even gave birth to such a big son behind his back. Qin Zan was so angry that his eyes turned red, and he wished he could kill her with his own hands. Just then, Cheng Wei's cell phone rang. He answered it, but his expression changed in an instant. "Brother Zan." Cheng Wei came over and whispered in Qin Zan's ear, "News came from the villa that grandma is not in good condition." Qin Zan's face froze, and it took him a while to react. He looked at Cheng Wei and asked, specifically. Cheng Wei said, "I don't know, he just vomited once and now the medicine can't be injected." Qin Zan didn't delay any further, turned around and strode towards the elevator. Qin Zan stopped after only 2 steps, turned around and said to Zhuang Ji, "Zhuang Ji, you'd better come up with a perfect explanation, otherwise, I will make you regret it." Chapter 5 The Lost and Found Sister. Only after Qin Zan completely disappeared did Zhuang Ji lose all his strength in despair. Jing Yuker leaned over, raised his hand and gently stroked the back of Zhuang Ji's head, and said softly, "It's okay, you are already divorced, he has no right to pursue responsibility." Upon hearing this, Zhuang Ji closed his eyes in pain and let the tears fall. She had screwed up. She had hidden Zhuang Yu well, and no one in the Qin family had discovered his existence for 3 years. But now, Zhuang Ji hugged Zhuang Yu tightly. She was very scared that Qin Zan would hurt her child. It took Zhuang Ji a while to calm down and deal with his emotions. She looked at Granny Wen and said, "Granny, take Yu home first. Don't go out these few days. I'll pick you up when I've made arrangements." Granny Wen was the one who came to take care of her and Zhuang Yu after her mother passed away. She was also one of the few people she trusted in this world. Zhuang Yu didn't want to be separated from Zhuang Ji. He hugged Zhuang Ji's neck tightly with his hands and said, "Mommy, I want to be with you." Zhuang Ji's heart ached for a moment, and he said patiently, "Be good, Yu, go back with Grandma for a few days, and Mommy will come to live with you soon." Although Zhuang Yu was unwilling, he had been separated from his mother since he was a child, which made him more sensible and obedient than other children. He wrinkled his chubby face and said, "Then Mommy, you have to come here quickly." After Granny Wen took Zhuang Yu away, Zhuang Ji tidied himself up before going into the ward. Her sister Li Yan, who she had been separated from since childhood, was lying on the hospital bed. If she had not accidentally picked up Li Yan, who had fainted on the roadside 4 years ago, she would not have known what kind of life Li Yan had led with her father since their parents divorced when she was 10 years old and Li Yan was 7 years old. Their father soon married a new wife and had a son. From the time Li Yan was 7 years old to the time she was 21, the stepmother pretended to be Li Yan's biological mother in front of others, but humiliated and abused her in all kinds of ways behind others. She tortured Li Yan from a chubby little girl of 7 years old into a bag of bones, and even called it cultivating Li Yan's appearance and temperament as a lady from a noble family. After Li Yan contracted a strange disease, they only pretended to treat her for a week and then abandoned her in a dilapidated house outside to die. At that time, Li Yan was still able to move, but her will to survive made her work several jobs just to earn money for her medical expenses. This put even more strain on her already fragile body, until she collapsed from exhaustion on the side of the road. It was at that time that Zhuang Ji picked up Li Yan. When she was arranging the hospitalization procedures for her, she found out that she was her sister who had been heartbroken for 14 years. It was also at that time that she realized how much of a villain their father was. She went to the Li family and moved Li Yan's household registration out. From then on, the two sisters completely severed their relationship with that scumbag. However, Li Yang's illness caused Zhuang Ji to go to various hospitals but to no avail until she met Jing Yuker again. At Jing Yuker's suggestion, she picked up her mother's research and began to study new drugs for Li Yang's condition. This research took 4 years. Looking at her weak sister lying on the hospital bed, Zhuang Ji regretted very much. She should not have listened to her mother and went to the Qin family to find a way to avenge her. In 3 years, she found nothing and wasted time developing new drugs. When thinking of the Qin family, Zhuang Ji couldn't help but think of Qin Zan. Thinking of Qin Zan, she suddenly remembered the symptoms Cheng Wei had described. She vomited once and the medicine could not be injected. Chapter 6 Compensation for hiding the presence of a son. Zhuang Ji picked up the medical record and looked at the records. 3 months ago, Li Yan also had this symptom. Could it be that Li Yang's condition is not an isolated case and there are other people suffering from the same disease as her? Could it be that this was the fundamental reason why her mother asked her to go to the Qin family? Zhuang Ji fell into deep thought. Jing Yuker called her several times, but she didn't hear him. Gigi, what's wrong with you? Jing Yuker had no choice but to reach out and wave his hand in front of Zhuang Ji's eyes. Zhuang Ji came back to his senses and looked up at Jing Yuker. Meeting his worried gaze, Zhuang Ji said, "Brother, I suddenly thought of something. I'll leave first. Send me Yang data and I'll take a look later." After saying this, Zhuang Ji ran out of the ward without caring whether Jing Yuker agreed or not. At this time, Qin Zan had already arrived at the Qin family villa. He strode in, his face as dark as iron. The whole villa was desolate, even some young people who were usually nowhere to be seen were hugging each other and crying, as if they had started mourning. This made Qin Zan's face even darker. He tried hard not to yell out loud. It was not until he went up to the second floor and came to the old lady of the Qin family's room that he restrained his expression, pushed the door and walked in. At the bedside, the doctors and nurses hired at great expense were helpless. Even while observing the instruments and medicine bottles, it was obvious that they were just pretending. Obviously, apart from the fact that Mrs. Qin's breathing and heartbeat had not stopped, these people had already pronounced her dead. Qin Zan's mother Lu Shuqi had already cried for several times. The tears that had just stopped rolling down again when she saw Qin Zan walk in. Azan, Lu Shuqi stretched out her hand towards Qin Zan, sobbing and uttering incoherently, "Your grandmother, your grandmother." Lu Shuqi covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. Qin Zan could not accept this fact. With bloodshot eyes, he looked at the doctors with their heads drooping and said sternly, "What are you all standing there for? Save her. Keep saving her the same way you did before. Otherwise, what's the point of having you?" The leading doctor had to say, "Master, it's not that we don't want to save him, we just have no other options. They are just doctors, not gods. There is no other case of this strange disease in the world. They have done their best to allow old Mrs. Qin to live for more than 2 more years." Qin Zan clenched his fists. Only in this way could he control himself and not hit the doctor in the face with his fists. At this moment, Cheng Wei rushed in a hurry and said to Qin Zan, "Brother Zan, the young lady said that she is coming over and she has a way to save grandma." Qin Zan looked at Cheng Wei, as if repeating and confirming his words. Cheng Wei directly put the phone to his ear, and Zhuangji's voice came from it, "Qin Zan, tell me the address, it's compensation for hiding the fact that I have a son from you. Believe me, I can save your grandmother." Qin Zan tightened his jawline. If Zhuangji was in front of him, his punch would definitely hit her in the face. "Well done, Zhuangji. You're still negotiating a deal with him at this time." Qin Zan suppressed his anger and said, "Stand still, someone will pick you up." When he left Ankang Private Hospital, he left a car there and followed Zhuangji. Now that she was coming, he wanted to take a good look at what she was capable of. Chapter 7 Treat her as a savior. Half a minute after Zhuangji hung up the phone, a black car stopped in front of her. The driver got out of the car and respectfully opened the door for her. "Young madam, please get in." Zhuangji got into the car and heard him say, "Madam, this is an emergency. I will increase the speed of the car. We will start a winding mountain road in 15 minutes. If you feel any discomfort, please tell me immediately. Everyone in the Qin family is well trained. If they say 15 minutes, it means 15 minutes. Zhuangji did not feel any discomfort in the first half of the journey. Even though the car was going very fast, it was very stable. It was only after getting on the winding mountain road that she did start to feel a little dizzy. However, she was also worried. She didn't know what the situation of Qin Zan's grandmother was like now. If her condition was not as serious as Li Yang's, it would be fine. She also had to use this matter to negotiate with Qin Zan to avoid Qin Zan holding her accountable later. What's more, if the reason her mother asked her to go to the Qin family was really because of the old lady of the Qin family, then she would be so angry that she would die. In the past 3 years, she went to various places of the Qin family despite the Qin family's disgust and ridicule, but she had never been to the villa and had never met the old lady of the Qin family. On the wedding day, Zhuangji was told that the old lady of the Qin family had been recuperating in the villa all year round. She had never been seen without any major events. At that time, Zhuangji only clearly realized that he was not valued in the Qin family, and marrying Qin Zan was not a major event for the old lady of the Qin family. Now, this feeling of missing out makes Zhuangji feel uneasy. Finally, the car drove into the villa. Zhuangji had no intention of admiring the scenery here. He just hurried towards Cheng Wei, who was waiting at the main gate. When Cheng Wei saw her, he still respectfully called her, "Young madam." This sound attracted a lot of attention. Zhuangji had no time to pay attention to it. He just said to Cheng Wei, "Where is the old lady?" Cheng Wei said, "Young madam, please follow me." However, after taking only 2 steps, he was blocked by a girl with peach blossom makeup on. "Brother Cheng Wei, what does that mean? What is she doing here? Hasn't she already divorced my eldest brother? Why, knowing that grandma is dying, is she here to fight for the family property? The girl said, staring at Zhuang Ji with a bad look, as if she had taken millions out of her pocket. Zhuang Ji looked carefully before he realized that the girl was Qin Muge, the youngest daughter of Qin Zan's second cousin. 3 years ago, when she entered the Qin family's gate, she was still in high school and a basin of ice water was poured on her head. They called it a welcome ceremony for her to make her aware of her position in the Qin family. In response, her newlywed husband just watched coldly. He even quickly dodged to the side when the water was splashed down and glared at Qin Muge, just because the water splashed on his trouser legs. 3 years ago, Zhuangji had no intention of arguing with her. Now, she and Qin Zan have divorced, so she naturally doesn't have to endure her anger. Zhuangji raised his eyes and glanced at Qin Muge, then said in a cold voice, "Does your grandmother know that you keep calling her incompetent?" "What did you say?" Qin Muge exploded immediately, raising his hand to slap Zhuangji in the face. "How dare you talk back? Zhuangji, are you looking for death?" Zhuangji grabbed Qin Muge's wrist and restrained him with a backhand. She said, "I'm telling you, I'm here to treat your grandma. You should treat me as your savior. If you continue to be rude to me and delay your grandma's treatment, I'd like to see how many people in the Qin family can let you go." As their voice fell, Zhuangji's body suddenly felt cold. She felt a cold gaze falling on her, and when she looked up, she met Qin Zan's unfathomable gaze. Chapter 8 Everyone else, please get out. Qin Muge also saw Qin Zan and struggled a few times, but Zhuangji locked her tighter and tighter. Her bones ached, and she immediately asked Qin Zan for help with tears in her eyes. "Cousin, eldest cousin, save me, woo woo woo, this woman is crazy, woo woo woo." Qin Zan came over with a dark face, grabbed Zhuangji's wrist, and said sternly, "Don't let go." Zhuangji felt pain from his strong grip and had no choice but to let go of Qin Muge. Before he could say anything, Qin Muge had already run behind Qin Zan and started to complain, "Brother, this woman is so shameless that she dared to say that she could save grandma. Dr. Zhao couldn't do anything, but she still dared to talk nonsense like that. You should kick her out right away. I think she has bad intentions and wants to compete for our Qin family's property." The last sentence completely angered Qin Zan. "Shut up." Qin Zan glared at Qin Muge and said, "If you dare to say such treasonous words again, you will be punished by kneeling in the ancestral hall." Qin Muge pursed his lips and dared not say any more in front of Qin Zan, but his eyes could not help but stare at Zhuangji, hating her with resentment. Zhuangji rubbed his wrist that was pinched by Qin Zan and said emotionally, "Your people know where I came from. Believe it or not, if you believe me, your grandmother can still be saved. If you don't believe me, you can listen to your good cousin and prepare for her funeral." Qin Muge seized the opportunity again and took advantage of the situation to say, "Cousin, you heard it. That's what she said." "Shut up." Qin Zan yelled again, completely silencing Qin Muge. Indeed, his people followed Zhuangji all their way to the Yisheng Biological Research Institute. Zhuangji called Cheng Wei after she came out, and his people picked her up at the entrance of the institute. Qin Zan has received reports on all of this. He looked at Zhuangji and said, "You'd better keep your word." Zhuangji raised his chin, confidence evident on his face, a flamboyance and arrogance that Qin Zan had never seen before. Inexplicably, Qin Zan suddenly felt a sense of trust from the bottom of his heart. Yes, he believed her. Without further ado, Qin Zan turned and walked towards the stairs, and Zhuangji followed. Qin Muge stared in disbelief and subconsciously wanted to follow, but Cheng Wei grabbed her wrist and said, "Miss San, you should wait downstairs." Soon, Zhuangji and Qin Zan went upstairs and came to old lady Qin's room. The scene was no different from before. This time, the doctors and nurses didn't even bother to pretend. They just waited for the instrument to sound the alarm so that they could cover Mrs. Qin's face with the white cloth. At this age, although he had been bedridden for more than 2 years due to a strange disease, he died of old age and there is nothing to regret. Lu Shuqi gradually accepted her fate and sat on the sofa with a dazed look in her eyes, even her tears had dried up. However, when she saw Qin Zan leading Zhuangji in, she immediately became furious. She stood up and pointed at Zhuangji and cursed, "What are you doing here? Get out of here." Zhuangji ignored Lu Shuqi and said to Qin Zan, "I'm going to start treating your grandma. Let everyone else leave." This not only annoyed Lu Shuqi, but also made the doctors and nurses present look gloomy. They had never seen such an arrogant person before. He actually said that people like them who had worked hard and made great contributions were just outsiders. It was simply unreasonable. However, Qin Zan had already said to the leading Dr. Zhao, please go out. Chapter 9 She also has a variety of expressions. Dr. Zhao had never suffered such humiliation before, but due to the power of the Qin family and Qin Zan's terrifying skills, he didn't say much and just walked away. Lu Shuqi looked at Qin Zan in surprise. Was her son bewitched by Zhuang Ji? Why did he listen to Zhuang Ji so much after getting divorced? This was simply hard for her to accept. Lu Shuqi opened her mouth and called out, Azan. Qin Zan held her shoulders and said, Mom, you go out first. Having said that, he pushed Lu Shuqi out of the door. The door closed, and Zhuang Ji said, I said, get out. Qin Zan locked the door, strode to the sofa and sat down, his long legs forming a beautiful arc, strong and powerful. He looked at Zhuang Ji and said sarcastically, do you think I would let a liar like you stay with my grandma? Zhuang Ji didn't want to argue with him at this time, so he ignored his words and started to check on old lady Qin's condition. It was better than she expected. Mrs. Qin's symptoms were not as serious as Li Yang's, but it was certain that they had the same strange disease. Zhuang Ji felt extremely heavy-hearted. If she had known earlier that there was such a case in the Qin family, when she was developing new drugs in the past 3 years, she would not have to rely on remote control and ask Kai Yi and others to do the sampling and experiments. She could have done it herself, saving time and effort. Maybe she would have developed the drug by now and could have cured Li Yang's disease. After confirming Mrs. Qin's condition, Zhuang Ji took out a brand new pair of medical gloves and extended his hand towards Qin Zan. Qin Zan frowned and looked at her, wondering what she was going to do. Zhuang Ji said, since you insist on staying, then don't just sit there and come and help. Qin Zan stood up, took the gloves and put them on, but he began to wonder in his heart whether this girl was reliable. Zhuang Ji didn't care what he was thinking. He had already lifted the quilt and turned half of old lady Qin's body over. Hold me. Qin Zan supported her grandmother, but her eyes followed the movements of Zhuang Ji's hands. She first lifted up the old lady Qin's clothes, and then picked up a syringe. The needle was much thicker than the common ones. When Zhuang Ji was about to insert the needle into old lady Qin's skin, Qin Zan stopped her and said, what are you going to do? When Zhuang Ji was concentrating on her work, she was most annoyed by such noisy people. She didn't even glance at Qin Zan, but just said impatiently, if you can help, shut up. If you can't help, get out. This was the first time in Qin Zan's life that he was scolded in such a tone, and for a moment he even forgot about his previous question. His eyes unconsciously fell on Zhuang Ji's face, and he suddenly realized that in just a few hours, he had seen all kinds of expressions on her face that he had never seen in the past 3 years, bright, gentle, fragile, pleading, and now, impatient, focused. It turns out that she has so many expressions, not just that wooden face without any emotion. While Qin Zan was in a trance, Zhuang Ji had already inserted the needle into old lady Qin's skin. After drawing out 2 tubes of black and red liquid, she cleaned the needle hole and took out 2 bottles of medicine in the refrigerated boxes from the box she brought with her, and injected them into old lady Qin's blood vessels respectively. After doing all this, she took out another bottle, threw the one that was originally used by old lady Qin aside, and gave old lady Qin a new injection. When Qin Zan came to his senses, he saw that the medicine was flowing drop by drop into his grandmother's blood vessels. Chapter 10 Who is it? In less than half an hour, Zhuang Ji solved the situation that left Dr. Zhao and others helpless. Zhuang Ji sorted out the used medical waste, took off his gloves, and raised his hand to tuck his hanging hair behind his ears. She looked at Qin Zan and said, let me remind you that it is best not to use the medicine I gave your grandma before. It is not very useful except wasting money. As he spoke, Zhuang Ji seemed to think of something and added, but it doesn't matter. You're not short of money anyway, so something is better than nothing. After saying that, Zhuang Ji picked up his things and prepared to leave. Qin Zan blocked her way, looked at her with deep eyes, and said, who are you? Zhuang Ji met Qin Zan's gaze and said speechlessly, Zhuang Ji, how come you forgot about your ex-wife so quickly when you just divorced her yesterday? Qin Zan was annoyed by her perfunctory answer. He grabbed her neck and said, you know what I'm asking, Zhuang Ji. You'd better answer honestly. What is your purpose in coming to the Qin family? Zhuang Ji was strangled to the point of losing her breath. Her fair little face quickly turned red. She waved her hands around in hatred and fear. She had no doubt that this man really wanted to kill her. Finally, Qin Zan loosened his hand, and Zhuangji bent down and gasped heavily. After recovering from the shock, Zhuangji slapped Qin Zan on the chest and shouted at him angrily, "Qin Zan, are you sick? I just saved your grandmother, and you are not grateful, but you want to kill me. How can you repay kindness with enmity?" Zhuangji felt very aggrieved, his eyes were red, but he stubbornly refused to shed tears in front of Qin Zan. Qin Zan's anger inexplicably subsided a lot, but he still asked in a bad tone, "Then explain to me, how could you do this? Given her skilled techniques, it would be impossible to achieve them without 10 or 8 years of experience. How old is she? Besides, she has been doing nothing in the Qin family for 3 years." Zhuangji said, "I went to the junior class of medical school when I was 16, and started working in the hospital after graduation. I have the qualification to practice medicine, so it's only natural that I know these things. You never asked me, so you can't blame me." Qin Zan's eyes softened a little. Okay, this one was her explanation. Then what is your relationship with the Sheng Biological Research Institute? Why do you have this medicine? Qin Zan asked again. Zhuangji almost blurted out the answer, but changed his tone when the words were on the tip of his tongue. "You can see that my sister is in a hospital now. She has this disease. The research institute accidentally discovered my sister's condition and asked her to be a volunteer for their new drug research and development experiments. As my sister's only relative, I have no place to live after divorcing you. It's not too much to ask them to provide me with a job." If Qin Zan had not gone to Ankang private hospital in person, he would have really believed what she said. A person who just divorced him and went to work in a research institute could easily get such precious medicine. Moreover, from the conversation between him and Cheng Wei, it can be judged that his grandmother and her sister had the same disease, but he dared to use it on his grandmother. She thought he was a ghost fooling him. Qin Zan sneered and said, "Zhuangji, you are indeed a liar who is full of lies." Zhuangji glared at Qin Zan angrily. How many times would he have to attack her personally before he would stop? If it wasn't for asking him not to pursue the matter of Zhuangyu, she wouldn't bother to see him again. Just as he was thinking, Qin Zan said slowly, "Well, now let's explain to you when you cheated on me and gave birth to someone else's bastard." Chapter 11. It has nothing to do with him. Zhuangji's breathing suddenly stagnated. Qin Zan's constant calling of him, "little bastard," was really irritating to his ears. She drooped her eyelashes, quickly packed her things, and was about to walk out. Old Mrs. Qin's health has stabilized and she doesn't need to stay here any longer. His arm was tightly grasped, and Qin Zan's face became even darker than before. "You want to leave without an explanation? Zhuangji, what do you think my Qin family is?" Zhuangji suddenly raised his eyes and looked towards Qin Zan, his eyes full of coldness. Her lips opened and closed, and Qin Zan only heard her utter 4 words, "It has nothing to do with you." As soon as their voice fell, Zhuangji pulled his arm out from Qin Zan's palm. Qin Zan was furious and wanted to stop Zhuangji again, but he heard her say, "If you don't want your grandma to get into trouble, I advise you not to provoke me. Otherwise, I'm not sure what I will do." While Zhuangji was saying this, he felt ashamed of his own behavior in his heart. What is she doing? Using an old man to threaten people. When did she become so shameless? These words completely angered Qin Zan. Waves quickly surged in his almond-shaped eyes, which were filled with murderous intent. Even though he had not done anything to Zhuangji yet, Zhuangji still felt a chill all over his body. He could only raise his neck and look at Qin Zan with pretended calmness, and then quickly left. Lu Shuqi and a group of doctors had been waiting outside. When they saw the door open, they rushed in. Lu Shuqi glared at Zhuangji fiercely, and her eyes were exactly the same as Qin Zan's, both full of murderous intent. However, before he could finish the threatening words, Zhuangji had already strode down the stairs. Lu Shuqi was very angry, and what she wanted in her mind was to ask Qin Zan to teach Zhuangji a lesson. She just entered the room and before she could speak, she heard several doctors discussing in amazement or admiration, "It's so shocking. The old lady's condition has stabilized. This is simply a miracle. Based on this situation, it is uncertain whether I will be able to recover in the future. Young master, madam, which hospital does that doctor just now come from?" Someone came over to ask, with joy on his face. If such a genius was admitted to their hospital, then it would only be a matter of time before their hospital became famous across the country. Lu Shuqi finally came back to her senses from her shock. She looked up at Qin Zan and asked in disbelief, Zan, did you hear what they said? Your grandma actually asked her to heal you. Qin Zan's lips were tightened, and even he was shocked by the current situation. The doctor said, Madam, the old lady has not been cured yet, but we have been able to stabilize her condition, which is already a great miracle. In the short term, the old lady will no longer be in danger of life. Lu Shuqi responded, thinking to herself that she knew it couldn't be Zhuang Ji's ability. However, just as she thought of this, another voice told her that it was Zhuang Ji's ability to stabilize the old lady's condition. Her expression was very bad and her mood was extremely complicated. Zhuang Ji has been in the Qin family for 3 years, and they didn't know she had such a skill. Now she is asked to admit that this is her ability. Lu Shuqi doesn't feel happy no matter how she thinks about it. Unconsciously, he wanted to listen to his son's opinion. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Qin Zan walking towards the door. The doctors looked at each other in bewilderment. What was going on? How come Mrs. Qin's condition had stabilized, but Madame Qin and the eldest son looked so unhappy? Chapter 12 Beat Qin Muge. Corner of the second floor. Qin Zan called Cheng Wei. His face looked unhappy, so Cheng Wei didn't say what was on the tip of his tongue. Qin Zan pulled out a box of cigarettes, took out a cigarette, lit it, put it to his lips and took a deep puff. He raised his eyelids and looked towards Cheng Wei, saying, When did you become so hesitant? Just say what you want to say. Cheng Wei said, Young Master Zhuang came down from upstairs just now, and Mu Ji stopped her from leaving. The two of them had a conflict. Having said this, Cheng Wei paused again. Qin Zan became impatient, frowned, and his body pressure suddenly dropped. Cheng Wei continued, Ms. Zhuang beat Mu Ji. Hearing this, Qin Zan couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, with surprise in his eyes. After the surprise, he felt an interest that he himself didn't even notice. Although Cheng Wei was surprised by Qin Zan's reaction, he continued, Second Master and Second Madam have taken Mu Ji to the other courtyard. Second Madam is waiting for you. In fact, the Second Madam wanted to pull Qin Muge up and ask for an explanation. If she hadn't been reminded that this was old lady Qin's territory, which made her dare not act rashly, the entire villa would have been in chaos by now. Qin Zan took another puff of his cigarette, exhaled the smoke ring, and asked, Where's she? Cheng Wei couldn't help but be surprised and answered truthfully, he was picked up by the car last night. As Cheng Wei finished speaking, Qin Zan's face visibly darkened another shade. Then, there was a cold sneer. Qin Zan said, Go check. Cheng Wei didn't ask what to investigate. As long as it was related to Zhuang Ji, he would investigate every detail. After answering, Cheng Wei prepared to do it. As he was about to raise his foot, Qin Zan suddenly stopped him and said, Don't say anything more until you find out the details about the hospital. Cheng Wei was stunned for a few seconds, then he said, I understand, Brother Zan. Cheng Wei left, and Qin Zan stood by the window with gloom in his eyes. Zhuang Ji, what secrets have been hidden under his nose in the past 3 years? He wanted to peel off her skin layer by layer to see what was inside. The cigarette burned down, and the sparks burned the skin of Qin Zan's fingers, bringing him back to his thoughts. Only then did he notice that his left hand was clenched into a fist, with veins bulging on the back of his hand, indicating that he was extremely angry. How dare she carry such a big child on his back? Hearing footsteps, Qin Zan raised his eyelids and looked over, and saw Qin Muge walking up the stairs with messy hair and red and swollen eyes, tears on her face, looking extremely aggrieved. Next to her was the second wife of the Qin family, Yin Yorong. A hint of coldness flashed across Qin Zan's eyes, and he moved his feet slightly, just in time to block the two people's way to continue going upstairs. Yin Yorong looked at Qin Zan and said, Zan, I'll take Mu Ji up to see the old lady. Qin Zan seemed to have no objection and asked with concern, What happened to Mu Ji? As soon as Qin Muge heard her eldest cousin's question, tears immediately fell down. She felt wronged and pitiful, and completely forgot what Yin Yorong had said to her before. Brother, you must help me get revenge. That bitch Zhuang Ji beat me up. Woo 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 woo. Yin Yorong secretly pinched Qin Muge's flesh from behind, trying to make her shut up. However, at the moment, Qin Muge was only concerned with accusing Zhuang Ji with Qin Zan and did not feel Yin Yorong's hint at all. She called Zhuang a little bitch and told Qin Zan how he threw her to the ground in front of everyone in the Qin family and threatened her to avoid her next time she saw her, otherwise he would beat her every time he saw her. She described all the evil deeds in vivid detail to Qin Zan. Chapter 13 Going to put eye drops on Grandma. Brother, you must help me get revenge. Qin Muge cried so pitifully and convulsed as if she might pass out at any moment. However, even though she cried for a long time, Qin Zan's expression did not show any sign of change. Yin Yurong observed Qin Zan's expression, thinking about how to get Qin Zan to give their second wife some benefits. Who would have thought that before she could open her mouth, she heard Qin Zan say, "Go to see Grandma after you calm down." How can Grandma feel if she hears you crying like this? Qin Muge was a little at a loss after hearing Qin Zan's words. Her tears stopped abruptly and her face became even redder. Seeing this, Yin Yurong quickly said, "Arzan, Muji just lost control of her emotions when she saw you. She didn't mean to cry in front of the old lady. She knew very well how important old lady Qin was to Qin Zan. Qin Muge crying like this would inevitably make Qin Zan feel unlucky. She also wanted to take a gamble and see if Qin Zan would feel sorry for Qin Muge. Now it seems that she has taken the wrong path." Upon hearing this, Qin Zan looked towards Yin Yurong, but his eyes suddenly turned colder. Qin Zan said, "Really? If second aunt hadn't said so, I would have thought that second aunt had deliberately brought Muji to help Grandma." His tone no longer had the concern he had just had. It took a sudden turn for the worse, and his whole body exuded an aura of oppression, causing Qin Muge to shrink his neck unconsciously and hide behind Yin Yurong uncontrollably. Yin Yurong looked even more embarrassed. The embarrassment of having her thoughts so clearly exposed made her feel as if she was stripped naked. But Yin Yurong did not give up. She said stubbornly, "Arzan, what you said makes it sound like I did something unacceptable. We just want to care about the old lady. Not only us, but everyone is still waiting and is very anxious." Qin Zan's face grew even darker, and he stopped exposing Yin Yurong's sophistry. He was even more disgusted with her for dragging everyone in the Qin family into this. He only said, "Grandma's condition is stable and she needs to rest. Second aunt can tell everyone to go back and do what you need to do." The implication was that the old lady Qin they thought was dying did not exist at all. Yin Yurong's heart sank. Does this mean that the danger is over? Qin Zan looked at her expression, and there was a dark tide in his eyes. Before Yin Yurong could speak again, Qin Zan said, "Grandma hates people who are not dressed properly. Second aunt, remember to remind Muji to change clothes and comb her hair before coming over next time." After saying that, Qin Zan turned around and went upstairs. Yin Yurong could no longer hold back his expression, his face turned grim with anger, his teeth clenched tightly, and his eyes were filled with hatred. Qin Muge then pulled Yin Yurong's arm and said, "Mom, let's go back." Just now in the villa, she wanted to change her clothes, but her skirt was torn by Zhuang's throw. Even if it wasn't for her grandmother's rules, she couldn't bear to wear such clothes. But Yin Yurong told her not to change it and even made her hair even more messy, saying it would be useful. Little did she know that this would completely infuriate her eldest cousin. In fact, all of this is to blame on Zhuang. If it weren't for her, how could the mother and daughter have angered their eldest cousin? Qin Muge clenched his hands tightly, completely hating Zhuang. She must avenge this. She won't let Zhuang go. Yin Yurong didn't know what Qin Muge was planning. Her mind was full of Qin Zan's words. From what he said, the dead old woman didn't die. Chapter 14 I underestimated her. On the winding mountain road, Zhuang leaned back in his chair and rubbed his shoulder bones. After not doing it for several years, she actually became rusty. When she carried Qin Muge on her shoulders, the decoration on Qin Muge's skirt got her shoulder bone stuck, and it hurt a lot. Seeing Zhuang like this, Kai couldn't help but mutter, "Boss, you've already divorced Qin Zan, why are you still meddling in their family's affairs? If you ask me, just let them fend for themselves." During the past 3 years, Zhuang had not been comfortable living in the Qin family, and Kai felt unhappy just thinking about it. Zhuang stopped what he was doing, turned his head to look at Kai, and said, "Don't talk nonsense. Madame Qin has never targeted me. But she never spoke for you either," Kai said dissatisfiedly. If it weren't for old lady Qin's inaction, Zhuang wouldn't have had such a hard time in the Qin family. Zhuang pursed her lips and said nothing. She had already begun to think about what the connection was between old lady Qin and Li Yan. How could they have the same disease? Seeing this, Kai Yi didn't dare to say anything more and concentrated on driving. On their way back, Zhuangji thought of something and took out his seldom-used mobile phone to send a message. Kai Yi saw it out of the corner of his eye and asked tentatively, "Boss, do you have any tasks that you can let me do?" Zhuangji put away his phone and said, "No need, just do your research." Kai Yi's mouth drooped and he muttered, "Boss, actually, having me is enough for you." Zhuangji looked at him and laughed. "Why, do you really want to run errands outside?" "No," Aikino denied immediately, "I just wanted to help you, boss." He would never say that he was afraid that the boss would no longer use him after calling the others back. How could Zhuangji not guess Kai Yi's little thoughts? He chuckled and said, "Don't worry, I still have to rely on you in the research institute. As for other places, he is indeed not suitable." Kai Yi didn't hear the hidden meaning in Zhuangji's words, and he was very happy in his heart. He was going to send a message to the group to show off. The two returned to the Yisheng Biological Research Institute. As soon as Zhuangji walked in, he was called over by Hua Zhongxian. As soon as he entered the door, Zhuangji saw the familiar figure sitting on the sofa. There was no expression on her face, and she was very respectful to Hua Zhongxian. "Boss, you are looking for me." Hua Zhongxian knew that Zhuangji was pretending not to be familiar with her, but it was too late now. He stood up from his seat and said to Zhuangji, "Mr. Qin is here to see you. I have something to go out for. You two can talk." Zhuangji's eyes darkened. There was no need to explain it clearly. It was obvious that Qin Zan already knew her identity. She did not act anymore. Instead, after Hua Zhongxian closed the door and left, she walked to the sofa farthest from Qin Zan and sat down. Qin Zan's face suddenly darkened. He spoke, his tone was very aggressive. "I really underestimated you, a genius researcher." Qin Zan emphasized the 5 characters, genius researcher. Obviously, in his opinion, Zhuangji had stayed in the Qin family for 3 years while hiding his identity, which made him very unhappy. Especially, whenever Qin Zan thought about his grandmother who was suffering from illness and he had sought medical treatment everywhere but to no avail, but Zhuangji was completely unaware of it, he couldn't help but get angry. However, before his anger could be ignited, it was extinguished by Zhuangji's words. Zhuangji said, "Don't act like I owe you the Qin family anything. Before you blame me, think back to whether you told me anything about the old lady's illness." Chapter 15 He is making trouble. Zhuangji's words were cold and ruthless, but left Qin Zan speechless. Just as Zhuangji said, during the time he was at the Qin family, neither he nor anyone else in the Qin family had ever revealed anything to Zhuangji about his grandmother's illness. Now, he blamed Zhuangji for keeping silent, which made him seem unreasonable. Zhuangji looked at Qin Zan indifferently with lazy eyes. She knew that Qin Zan did not come here to bring up old grievances with her, so she was waiting for him to get to the point. Qin Zan adjusted his breathing, turned his tongue, and said, "Zhuangji, I beg you to cure my grandma." His tone was extremely sincere, a kind of plea that Zhuangji had never heard before, and it really caught Zhuangji off guard. She had originally thought that given Qin Zan's personality, he would probably order her around. Then she would definitely not give him the slightest bit of good face, and she would let him see anyway that she, Zhuangji, was not the person in the Qin family who allowed everyone to step on her. But now, Qin Zan's attitude was completely beyond her expectations, and it made her a little confused. Zhuangji was silent for a moment, then he sat up straight and said to Qin Zan with the same sincere attitude, "According to my preliminary judgment, Madame Qin's condition is the same as Li Yan's. But since you have come here and have Uncle Hur confess my true identity to you, I believe you should have found out what stage the research has progressed. What I can guarantee you at present is that I can stabilize Madame Qin's condition, but to cure her, I must tell you frankly that it is not possible at this stage." As he spoke, Zhuangji lowered his eyelashes. Her fingers clenched unconsciously, her heart filled with unwillingness. The research has reached the final stage, but this final stage takes too long. Qin Zan looked at Zhuangji. He saw all her expressions and movements clearly and carefully. He knew very well that Zhuangji was not saying this on purpose to deceive him, there was no reason for it, and Qin Zan simply believed this. There was another long silence, and Qin Zan said, "If you need my help, please tell me." Zhuangji raised his eyebrows slightly, surprised for half a second, but soon realized that Qin Zan said this just for old lady Qin, not because he was kind. Nodding slightly, Zhuang said, I won't be polite with you. At this point in the conversation, the two seemed to have reached a consensus and there was no need to continue. However, Qin Zan did not leave in a hurry. Instead, he sat there, looking as if he wanted to say something but hesitated. Zhuang's heart sank, and he stood up from the sofa suddenly and said, For Madame Qin's sake, you should go back first, and don't delay me from doing my research. I will inform you if there is any progress. After saying that, Zhuang strode towards the door. Qin Zan's eyes dimmed. How could he not see that Zhuang was about to flee in panic? The words that were on the tip of my tongue were never asked. 2 minutes after Zhuang left, Qin Zan also left Hua Zhongxian's office. Back in the car, Cheng Wei observed Qin Zan's expression and was surprised that he didn't see any anger. God knows how nervous he was when he found out that Zhuang was the talented researcher Qin Zan had been looking for. He just wanted to disobey Qin Zan's order and go in with him. Otherwise, he was really worried that Qin Zan would overturn the Yisheng Biological Research Institute. Seeing that Qin Zan looked normal, Cheng Wei was curious. Chapter 16 for Grandma. Cheng Wei was about to ask for clarification when he heard Qin Zan say, Have someone deliver the equipment you ordered earlier. Cheng Wei was extremely surprised. He turned his head to look at Qin Zan and repeated, Brother Zan, are you talking about the equipment ordered from country R? Those were the most advanced equipment in the world. Qin Zan had originally planned to find someone to do the research himself if he couldn't find that talented researcher. Those equipment were prepared for research, but now, they were sent to the Yisheng Biological Research Institute. Qin Zan raised his eyelids. Any opinions? Cheng Wei was now certain that Qin Zan was serious, and he immediately said, No, Brother Zan, I'll arrange it right away. Qin Zan thought for a moment, and then added, After that, you should keep in touch with Hua Zhongxian, and provide them directly with anything they need. Cheng Wei responded, but couldn't help feeling a little suspicious. After struggling for a while, Cheng Wei still asked, Brother Zan, are you doing this for the young lady? He deliberately changed Miss Zhuang back to young madam, but all he got in return was a glare from Qin Zan. Qin Zan said, I said, for Grandma, I will do anything. The implication is that it has nothing to do with Zhuang. Cheng Wei pursed his lips, looking as if he understood, but he still had his own thoughts. If it was really just for old lady Qin, then Qin Zan could have just captured Zhuang and just done research for him. Why would he give all the equipment to the Yisheng Biological Research Institute? Doing so would feel like he was preparing a wedding dress for them. After all, once the research results were made public, the Yisheng Biological Research Institute would surely move to a higher level. However, Cheng Wei just thought about it in his mind and did not say it out loud. He just had another hunch, and perhaps it would be confirmed in the near future. Cheng Wei was very efficient. He said he would send the equipment over, and in the afternoon he brought a large team to deliver the equipment. Zhuang was in the laboratory at this time. Before entering, she told Kai Yi not to disturb her for any reason. This resulted in Zhuang being completely unaware of the matter of this batch of equipment. Cheng Wei delivered the equipment around 6 o'clock in the afternoon. It was time to get off work, but everyone in the institute stayed behind without any prior agreement. The reason is simple, these devices are so advanced that they don't want to miss the first glimpse. Hua Zhongxian was also a little overwhelmed by this huge pie that suddenly fell on him, so he temporarily asked someone to clear out a room and temporarily put these equipment in it. After all the equipment was moved in, Cheng Wei said directly to Hua Zhongxian, Boss Hua, Brother Zan means that these equipment should be used by Miss Zhuang first. He did not take into account the presence of other people from the institute, or rather, he did it on purpose. Hua Zhongxian said, This is as it should be. In recent years, our institute has been taking the study of TXBI16 gene disease as a first-level research task, and Zhuang is the chief researcher of this research. Even though Cheng Wei had already found out Zhuang identity, he still felt sad when he heard Hua Zhongxian say this. It was obvious that the person I was looking for was in the Qin family, but I didn't know it until now. This is what fate means. Cheng Wei said nothing more and left with his men. At this time, everyone put aside all their restraints, gathered around the several devices, and began to study them with shining eyes. Chapter 17 Don't blink. Zhuang didn't leave the laboratory until after 11 o'clock in the evening. She looked tired and exhausted. Kai Yi had been waiting for a long time. When he saw her come out, he couldn't help but greet her excitedly, "Boss." As soon as he opened his mouth, he saw that Zhuang Zi's face was pale and he was obviously extremely tired. Kai Yi quickly unscrewed the lid of the thermos cup in his hand and handed it over. "Boss, drink some water first. You haven't had any water for more than 10 hours. How can you be like this? How can your body take it?" He had now settled for the second best option and did not ask Zhuang Zi whether he had eaten anything. The answer was obvious. There was no way there was anything in the laboratory for Zhuang Zi to eat. But before Zhuang Zi went in, he had already prepared water and put it in there. Apparently, Zhuang Zi was so immersed in the experiment that he didn't remember about it at all. Zhuang Zi drank most of the cup from the thermos and recovered a lot. He then said to Kai Yi, "Use a different cup next time. This one is too heavy." She is holding the cup now, her hands are shaking. Kai Yi quickly said, "I know, I will go buy a new one in a while." Zhuang Zi finished the remaining half cup of water, handed it back to Kai Yi, and asked, "Why are you so excited just now?" Things were cloudy for her. After staying in the laboratory for more than 10 hours, there was still no progress. When asked about this, Kai Yi became excited again and quickly said to Zhuang Zi, "Boss, come with me." He even kept the secret, and his excited look made Zhuang Zi even more annoyed. Zhuang Zi said, "If you don't have anything serious to do, don't blame me for blowing your head off." Whenever Kai Yi heard Zhuang Zi say this in the past, his subconscious reaction was to hold his head tightly with both hands. After all, he had really been beaten by Zhuang Zi. When he first started doing research with Zhuang Zi, his arrogance led to fatal errors in several experiments. At that time, Zhuang Zi gave him a severe punishment. However, this time, Kai Yi winked at Zhuang Zi and said, "Boss, don't worry, this is definitely a serious matter, a good thing, a great thing." As they were talking, the two of them had already walked to the door of a room. Kai Yi did not open the door immediately. Instead, he held the door handle and said to Zhuang Zi, "Boss, you have to look carefully and don't blink." Zhuang Zi couldn't help but frown, and was very impatient with Kai Yi's deliberate emotional exaggeration. Seeing this, Kai Yi didn't dare to continue. He quickly turned the doorknob and turned on the light in the house. In an instant, several of the world's most advanced equipment appeared in front of Zhuang Zi. No matter how calm and composed Zhuang Zi was, he couldn't help but be stunned at this moment. She was very familiar with these devices and had always wanted them. However, the last time she and Hua Zhongxin tried to buy new equipment, they concluded that their institute did not have enough funds to afford them. So she had to regretfully say that she would not be able to get them. At this moment, the equipment she had always dreamed of was right in front of her. It took Zhuang Zi a long time to react. She even didn't dare to blink, for fear that she was too tired and had hallucinations. Upon seeing this, Kai Yi stretched out his hand in front of Zhuang Zi and waved it back and forth. "Boss, come back to your senses, these are all real, they are all ours," Aikino said excitedly. However, the next second, a crisp pop was heard. Chapter 18 It's not impossible to show your true colors early. Kai Yi moved his hand back in front of his eyes in a daze, staring at the huge red handprint on the back of his hand. For a moment, he felt aggrieved, but he didn't know whether to say it or not. Zhuang Zi also came back to his senses, looked at Kai Yi, and asked, "Does it hurt?" Kai Yi felt even more aggrieved after hearing this. He looked up at Zhuang Zi and said, "Boss, the force is mutual. Does it hurt?" Zhuang Zi. Honestly, the pain wasn't too bad, but her palms were really numb. After coughing lightly, Zhuang Zi murmured, "It seems that I am not dreaming." Kai Yi was speechless and choked with emotion. At the same time, he suddenly felt fortunate that he had put his hand in front of Zhuang Zi to receive the blow. If he had put his face over there would probably be a finger mark on his handsome face. Then where would the most handsome guy in his institute put his face? Retracting his thoughts, Kai Yi said to Zhuang Zi seriously, "Of course, boss, you are not dreaming. These devices are real. They were sent here by Cheng Wei and his men." As soon as these words were spoken, Zhuang Zi, who was about to walk closer to take a closer look, stopped in his tracks. She turned her head to look at Kai Yi again and asked, "Who are you talking about?" Kai Yi answered honestly, "Cheng Wei, the man next to Qin Zan." Zhuang Zi didn't say anything. For a moment, he felt quite complicated. She didn't know before that Qin Zan had these devices. If she had known earlier, she might It's not impossible to confront Qin Zan sooner rather than later. Kai Yi didn't know what Zhuang Ji was thinking, he just told him everything he knew. So the person who had been contacting Uncle Hooer to meet you was Qin Zan. I said, who cares who he is, just make 500 million from him first. But it's not too late now. What does this mean? It means that the money that is supposed to go into our pockets will eventually come into our pockets. Kai Yi kept on talking non-stop, but Zhuang Ji just listened with one ear and not the other. She had walked to a device with an instruction manual on it. She was not in a hurry to turn on the device, but picked up the instruction manual and read it carefully. She had previously studied the functions of this device with Hua Zhongxian, and it could extract better results than their current equipment, with smaller units and in less time. At this moment, Zhuang Ji felt the blood in her body boiling. She wanted to move the equipment directly into the laboratory and start working immediately. Kai Yi saw Zhuang Ji's eyes getting brighter, and hurriedly said, "Boss, don't be impulsive. These equipment have not been disinfected yet. You can't use them now." Zhuang Ji closed the manual, raised his eyelids and glanced at him. His eyes said, "How could I not know this?" Kai Yahan laughed and scratched the back of his head. He knew that Zhuang Ji would know all this, but if Zhuang Ji got impulsive, it was not impossible for him to start disinfecting right away. He didn't care, but Zhuang Ji had already stayed in the laboratory for more than 10 hours. If he continued, given Zhuang Ji's personality, he would definitely dive into the laboratory after disinfection, and might not come out for 3 days and 3 nights. Therefore, for the sake of Zhuang Ji's health, Kai Yi said, "Boss, Uncle Hooer said that he will build a new laboratory specifically for these equipment. Until then, just put them here first. There is naturally a reason for doing this. These devices are so advanced that if they are placed in any current laboratory, the work may be out of sync. Therefore, Hua Zhongxian simply planned to set up a new laboratory." Zhuang Ji immediately understood, nodded, and said, "Then wait for Uncle Hooer's arrangement." Kai Yi was obviously relieved, and he came out of the house with Zhuang Ji. Kai Yi said, "Boss, let's go eat. I ordered porridge from Yu Ding Ji, and we can have it when we go over." Chapter 19 Enemies on a Narrow Road. Yu Ding Ji is located on a very famous night market street in Ningchen. Although it is already past midnight, the place is still bustling with people. People in Ningchen love to eat and they know how to eat. This night market street has its own specialties in each store. Even if you are just passing by here and have no plans to eat anything, once you smell the food, you will be unable to resist ordering 2 skewers of grilled squid to take away. Zhuang Ji and Kai Yi parked their car in the residential area across the street. On the one hand, this saved them the time of waiting for a parking space, and on the other hand, they could walk a few steps after eating to help digest the food. These were all based on experience. As the two of them approached, Zhuang Ji smelled the roasted lamb trotters from the stall next door and felt like trying them, so she asked Kai Yi to go in first while she went to buy 2 skewers and come back later. Kai Yi said, "Boss, you should go in first, and leave this matter to me." As he spoke, Kai Yi took out his cell phone and sent the verification code for the previously reserved location to Zhuang Ji. It's not that he couldn't give the phone directly to Zhuang Ji, but he still had to pay for it. Zhuang Ji didn't bother to be polite with him and walked straight into Yu Ding Ji. Just as I was about to show the verification code to the clerk, I heard a familiar voice yelling, "There is clearly an empty box, why are you saying there are no seats? I think you guys just don't want to do business properly." Zhuang Ji looked towards the source of the sound and his face immediately darkened. It's really a narrow road that enemies meet. When she was in Qin's house, she barely saw Qin Muge once a month. After her divorce, she ran into Qin Muge twice in just one day. Moreover, from what she said, the empty box. Zhuang Ji retracted his gaze and showed the verification code to the clerk, who immediately said, "The box has been reserved for you. Please follow me." Having said that, the waiter led Zhuang Ji to the private room. As they got closer, Qin Muge, who had been yelling at his boss, finally noticed Zhuang Ji. She rolled her eyes immediately, then seemed to remember something and subconsciously shrank back to make sure she was in a safe place. Qin Muge blurted out, "It's unlucky to run into dirty things wherever I go." Zhuang Ji was too lazy to pay attention to her and simply ignored her completely. Qin Muge was even more angry, and immediately said, "What the hell?" The moment she finished speaking, she saw the clerk leading Zhuang Ji to the door of the box and immediately became angry. She immediately started shouting, "Didn't they say that this box was reserved? How could she get in?" After these words were spoken, not only was the smiling boss and the clerk speechless, even Zhuangji finally gave Qin Muge a look, looking at Qin Muge as if he was a fool, and revealing a lot of sympathy. Qin Muge also realized something at this time. She was not ashamed of her shouting. Instead, she raised her chin and said to Zhuangji, "Does this mean that you booked this box?" Zhuangji withdrew his gaze, too lazy to pay attention to Qin Muge, and walked straight inside. Seeing this, Qin Muge said arrogantly, "Hey, give me this box and I can give you money." She was determined to get this box. She had been drinking with her male idol Zhengchen before. Zhengchen suddenly suggested that they come to Dingji to drink porridge, but since there are always more people here as the night goes on, when they called, they were told that the seats had already been booked and they could only queue up now. In order to make her male idol happy, she volunteered to come, but after she came, she was told that the queue would have to wait until at least 4 o'clock. How could that be possible? After walking around twice, Qin Muge found that the box was empty, so he kept pestering the boss of Dingji and insisted on having this box. Chapter 20 No Brain. Zhuangji knew that Qin Muge was a domineering and arrogant young lady as early as when she first entered the Qin family, but she was extremely speechless at this moment. If Qin Muge had any brains, she would have known that she was not someone she could order around. Obviously, Qin Muge has no brains. Not wanting to bother with Qin Muge, Zhuangji continued walking towards the box. This time, his wrist was grabbed. Qin Muge's movements were very rough, and the rhinestones on her exquisitely manicured nails slid across the skin on Zhuangji's wrist, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Zhuangji's eyes shone as he looked at Qin Muge. "It seems that you have forgotten the pain now that the wound has healed." She was hiding behind the shop owner just now, and she thought he had learned his lesson. Qin Muge's back stiffened at Zhuangji's harsh words. The severe pain and humiliation of being thrown to the ground by Zhuangji at the villa suddenly swept through his heart. The shame and anger and the desire to take revenge on Zhuangji intertwined with each other, making Qin Muge clench his fingers even tighter. Zhuangji's eyes became even colder. He pulled his hand out from Qin Muge's fingers and then pushed Qin Muge away. Qin Muge lost his balance and staggered after being pushed by Zhuangji. Fortunately, she was wearing flat shoes today, otherwise, she would have fallen to the ground by now. Zhuangji said coldly, "I warned you, stay away from me when you see me, otherwise, I will beat you every time I see you." As he spoke, Zhuangji raised his hand, as if his hand would fall on Qin Muge's cheek in the next second. Qin Muge's eyes widened, but he didn't say anything immediately. After a few seconds, when he saw that Zhuangji's hand didn't fall, he raised his chin and said, "Zhuangji, you don't have to scare me. I'm making a deal with you. If you give up the box, I'll give you double the money." "You?" These words happened to be heard by Kai Yi, who came in after buying roasted lamb's trotters. He immediately walked over quickly, stood in front of Zhuangji, and asked, "Boss, who is this? Is he causing you trouble?" Zhuangji saw Kai Yi's intention and said calmly, "I don't know him." Kai Yi immediately said, "I told you, where did this weirdo come from? He actually used money to pressure you. Is it because you have never seen money as the boss or what?" Zhuangji rubbed his forehead with a headache. There was no need to say that, as it made her look like a nouveau riche or a nouveau riche. Qin Muge became even more annoyed when she heard this. This man, whose relationship with Zhuangji was unknown, actually called her a weirdo. Qin Muge was so angry that he lost his mind. He pointed at Zhuangji's nose and cursed, "Okay. Zhuangji. Is this the reason why you divorced my cousin? How dare you cheat on my cousin and use his money to support a gigolo?" Zhuangji's brows were furrowed, she was speechless at Qin Muge's accusations. She really couldn't understand Qin Muge's brain circuit. To what extent was he disabled to come to such a conclusion? However, Qin Muge's accusation sounded like something completely different to others. People who didn't know the truth actually believed what Qin Muge said, and looked at Zhuangji and Kai Yi with either inquiry or contempt. Zhuangji was extremely annoyed and was extremely impatient with this kind of trouble. She didn't waste time talking to Zhuangji, but took out her cell phone, found a number that had been in her phone book for 3 years but had never been called, and dialed it. Chapter 21 His face is so big. Qin Muge was feeling very proud of herself. She was extremely happy when she saw people around her whispering about Zhuangji and Kai Yi. She just didn't believe that Zhuangji was so shameless that he could still stay here and drink porridge after being pointed at by others. She wanted to make Zhuang and this ignorant pretty boy too embarrassed to stay any longer. She wants to book this box. Qin Muge was extremely happy when she thought that she would be able to take credit to Jing Chen in a while. Maybe, if Jing Chen is in a good mood tonight, they can have a wonderful night. Just when Qin Muge was thinking happily, he heard a familiar name. Qin Zan. When she came to her senses, she saw Zhuang was talking on the phone. The person on the other end was obviously the cousin she was afraid of. Qin Muge heard Zhuang say, "Qin Zan, your sister is going crazy. If you don't want to see her in the hospital, come and take her away. Otherwise, if she loses her arms and legs, don't blame me for being merciless." Qin Muge couldn't believe what she heard. Zhuang was threatening her eldest cousin. How dare she? What's more, in a society ruled by law, she didn't believe that Zhuang really dared to break her arms or dismember her legs. However, just as this thought came to his mind, the memory of being thrown from behind by Zhuang came to his mind again. This memory reminded Qin Muge that there was nothing that Zhuang was afraid of. Just then, a group of people walked in. The person walking in the front center was Qin Muge's male god, Jing Chen. His expression was not good, and he even looked a little impatient. A burly man beside him said to Qin Muge in a bad tone, "Qin Muge, what are you doing? Why didn't you answer the phone call?" Qin Muge then noticed that Jing Chen and the others had arrived, and he immediately became flustered. He quickly said, "I was discussing the matter with the boss about the private room, and I didn't hear the phone ring." As she spoke, she observed Jing Chen's expression and was extremely nervous, fearing that Jing Chen would be unhappy because she didn't answer the call. Jing Chen didn't look at her, and even turned his face away. However, even so, Qin Muge was still fascinated by him. His profile was so handsome, and his sharp jawline made her want to slide her tongue on it. Less than 10 minutes into the infatuation, the burly man spoke again, "Are you done? Brother Chen is hungry." Qin Muge immediately said, Okay, you go in first." Having said that, he wanted to let Jing Chen and others go directly into the box. Kai Yi directly blocked the door of the box, twisted his mouth and said, "What? Is this box yours? Are you going to go in? How dare you?" These words finally made Jing Chen move his gaze over, but his eyes stayed on Zhuang face. "I hadn't noticed it before, but now I realize that there is such a beauty here." Qin Muge hadn't noticed Jing Chen's gaze yet. She just glared at Kai Yi angrily. If she hadn't still had the wit to maintain her image in front of Jing Chen, she would have rushed up and started a fight with Kai Yi. The sturdy man's face also darkened, and he asked Qin Muge unhappily, "What's the situation, Qin Muge, did you get the seat?" Qin Muge felt that this was the most embarrassing moment in her life. She clenched her fingers tightly, opened her mouth, but couldn't utter a word. Chapter 22 Worrying Quality. Kai Yi saw that his eldest son had shown an impatient expression on his face and stopped watching the fun. The most important thing was that if he delayed any longer, the roasted lamb's feet would get cold and his eldest son would have no appetite to eat them. Kai Yi said directly, "You students at Ningqing University are of this quality. If you can't reserve a private room, you grab others. So many people can queue up but you can't. You are bandits." His words directly included everyone headed by Jing Chen, and knocked down a whole group of people with one stick, making everyone's faces look ugly. Then, everyone turned their eyes to Qin Muge's face in unison, and all of them were full of resentment. The burly man was the first to start the fight, and said to Qin Muge fiercely, "Qin Muge, what on earth did you do?" Qin Muge's face turned red and white. She wanted to take a look at Jing Chen's expression, but was afraid to see his contemptuous eyes. She bit her lip tightly, lowered her head and said nothing. Kai Yi kindly answered everyone. Although he did not exaggerate, the Ningqing University, in his sentences and the occasional TSK seemed to be saying directly, "The quality of your Ningqing University students is worrying." And all of this was because of Qin Muge's arrogance and domineering behavior. The biggest common point among Jing Chen and his group is that they all come from Ningqing University. Under such circumstances, they naturally develop a sense of group consciousness and a spirit of sharing honor and disgrace. Everyone was so embarrassed by Kai Yi's continuous ridicule that they almost unanimously directed all their anger at Qin Muge. A girl who had been at odds with Qin Muge for a long time took the opportunity to say, "I've always said that she is a loser who is more likely to cause trouble than to accomplish anything. She can't even handle such a small matter, and she has embarrassed all of us. It's really annoying. Then the girl looked at Jing Chen and said, Brother Chen, can you please stop letting her rely on you in the future? If this happens a few more times, we will be too embarrassed to face anyone. When Qin Muge heard this girl taking advantage of the opportunity to add insult to injury, he instantly became furious. However, before she could open her mouth, she heard Jing Chen, who had always seemed to have nothing to do with the matter, finally speak, but the target was Zhuang Ji. Jing Chen looked at Zhuang Ji. His tone was the gentlest that Qin Muge had ever heard before. He said, Miss, I'm sorry. I was late and that's why I caused this. I've delayed your meal. How about this? Give me a chance and let me pay for you as an apology. What do you think, miss? From the beginning, Zhuangji had been waiting for Kai Yi to deal with the matter in an idle manner. She was a little tired today, and there was a lazy element in her character, which made her able to hide aside without hesitation when things had nothing to do with her. Unexpectedly, this guy was so annoying and had no tact at all. Especially, as soon as he said this, several gazes fell directly on Zhuangji's face, especially the girl just now, whose eyes seemed to want to peel off Zhuangji's skin. Of course, Qin Muge was no less than that. At this moment, he no longer cared about his image in front of Jing Chen. The pair of eyes that glared at Zhuangji seemed to be filled with poison. Chapter 23 Quite rich. However, among these several glances, there was one that made Zhuangji feel a chill down his spine. She subconsciously looked in the direction of that gaze and saw that Qin Zan had walked in at some point. And the way he looked at her, it was obvious that he had heard what Jing Chen said, and he seemed to be accusing her of cheating on him and hooking up with young boys all the time. Zhuangji was immediately annoyed. She looked away and met Jing Chen's eyes that pretended to be gentle. She said in a cold voice, no need. After that, Zhuangji said to Kai Yi, solve it as soon as possible. Kai Yi immediately said, boss, you eat first, I'll take care of it quickly. Zhuangji responded and went into the box. Zheng Chen raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at the closed door of the box with interest. It was the first time that he met a woman who was not interested in his face. This made him feel a desire to conquer her. After all, the woman looked quite rich. No one knew what Jing Chen was thinking. Kai Yi did not say much to Qin Muge and his group. He just negotiated directly with the boss. It was at this time that Qin Muge realized that Qin Zan had arrived. She hung her head and called out in a whisper as thin as a mosquito, cousin. Qin Zan's eyes were cold, and his voice was full of pressure. Do you want to go back by yourself, or should I ask someone to send you back? Qin Muge knew from Qin Zan's voice that he was in a bad mood. He didn't dare to have any more thoughts and said obediently, I'll go back by myself. Anyway, she didn't have the face to stay in front of Jing Chen anymore. Qin Zan swept a cold gaze across the faces of Jing Chen and others. Without saying anything more, he opened the door of the box and walked in. Kai Yi wanted to stop him, but when he thought about how Qin Zan had just asked Cheng Wei to deliver the most advanced equipment to their research institute, he felt embarrassed to stop him with such a rich sponsor. After all, it is a debt of gratitude to those who receive favors. Qin Muge bit her lip and stared at the box door that closed again. Her fear of Qin Zan subsided, and her chest was now filled with resentment towards Zhuangji. It was all because of that damn bitch Zhuangji. She caused her to lose face and even brought her cousin over. She swore that she would keep this account firmly in mind and would definitely take revenge on Zhuangji. After glaring at the door of the box, Zhuangji was too embarrassed to talk to Jing Chen anymore, so he turned around and ran out. Jing Chen and the others had no reason to stay any longer, so they all rushed out. During the walk, they could hear complaints and insults against Qin Muge. Kai Yi curled his lips and couldn't help but complain in his heart, what kind of idiot is Qin Muge, actually making friends with these people? However, Kai Yi only complained in his heart. He did not have any sympathy for Qin Muge. After all, when their boss was in the Qin family, she was bullied by Qin Muge a lot. He did not put a sack over her head and beat her up because he wanted to honestly implement the boss's instructions, don't cause trouble. Besides, what Kai Yi should be more concerned about right now is whether he should push the door in now. After thinking for a long time, Kai Yi decided not to go in for the time being. He said to the boss, Boss, I'll go order some more food. His boss is in a bad mood right now, so he has to order more of the food his boss likes, so that his boss won't mind his incompetence. Chapter 24 True Face. Inside the box. After Zhuang came in, he opened the roasted lamb's trotters, put on disposable gloves, picked up one and started eating. Although it had cooled down quite a bit, it still tasted good, which made her feel a little better. But, it's only a little bit. When Qin Zan pushed the door open, he happened to see Zhuang gnawing on a sheep's hoof. It seemed that he had bitten on the tendon and his teeth were struggling. Zhuang was not at all surprised that Qin Zan came in, nor did he care at all. She just raised her eyelids and glanced at Qin Zan lightly, then continued to gnaw on the sheep's hoof. Qin Zan sat down on the chair opposite her, but did not rush to speak. He just kept his eyes on her face. No matter how indifferent Zhuang was, he couldn't help but frown after being stared at by Qin Zan for 5 minutes. She put down the sheep's hoof in her hand, took off her disposable gloves, took a tissue and wiped her mouth, then she spoke. It came pretty fast. Less than 10 minutes after she hung up the phone, Qin Zan arrived. If someone who didn't know the situation knew about this, they might think that Qin Zan came here because he cared about her. Qin Zan said, "It just happened to be nearby." Zhuang pursed his lips, swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth, met Qin Zan's gaze, and said, "When I was in the Qin family before, it is undeniable that I took advantage of the Qin family. I can ignore how Qin Muge treated me, but now that you need my research, then I hope that at least a little peace can be guaranteed for me." In fact, Zhuang was not afraid of Qin Muge, and did not take her seriously at all, but she knew Qin Muge's character. She would provoke her with words when she had nothing to do. What's more, now there were new and old grudges added together. It was obvious that she would come to her door and get rid of this grudge. Zhuang was too lazy to spend time dealing with Qin Muge, so since Qin Zan could come now, she could draw a conclusion that if Qin Muge came to provoke her, he would not ignore it. Although Zhuang didn't know the reason, her principle was, don't do it yourself if you can avoid it. Qin Zan did not agree immediately, but looked at Zhuang with a deep gaze, as if trying to find out what position and identity she had in order to make such demands to him. Zhuang saw what he meant and frowned slightly. He became impatient for a moment and looked away. Zhuang said, "It doesn't matter if you don't agree. Just do as I said on the phone. If you lose an arm or a leg, don't come to me later to settle the score." As long as Qin Muge dared to cause trouble for her, she would beat her so hard that she would not even recognize her own mother. If then, their Qin family would be in chaos, she would not be responsible at all. After a long while, Qin Zan finally spoke, "This is your true face, isn't it?" Zhuang was speechless. He couldn't quite understand why Qin Zan's focus would be so much here. Before he could speak, Qin Zan continued, "You must have had a hard time pretending to be in the Qin family for the past 3 years. There was sarcasm in his tone, which was very harsh to Zhuang's ears. Zhuang felt very depressed, and asked herself if she had ever done anything against the law. Could it be that it was her fault that she was not close to the Qin family? She just didn't bother to curry favor with the Qin family, so they lived in peace for 3 years. Now, in Qin Zan's mouth, it seemed that she was being cunning and doing it on purpose. Chapter 25 Secretly Happy. Zhuang really didn't want to settle the past with Qin Zan. She had already given Qin Zan 2 choices. If he cared about Qin Muge, he should go back and tell her not to provoke her. If he didn't care, she also told him her solution. In the future, if the Qin family used this to hold them accountable, she would push Qin Zan out without hesitation. There was no need to continue the conversation. Zhuang looked at the grilled skewers on the table. The lamb's trotters were completely cold and she had no appetite anymore. The porridge had not been served yet, and Zhuang was a little annoyed. He really wanted to go back to the research institute and start the experiment right away. Thinking of this, Zhuang looked at Qin Zan again, and his attitude softened a lot. He said to him, "I haven't thanked you for the equipment you sent me yet. Don't worry, I will know why you sent me the equipment. I will work hard to research the medicine." Qin Zan was surprised by her sudden softening attitude. Her words were fair and direct. Qin Zan softened his attitude as well. "Then I'll wait for your good news." Zhuang responded and had nothing else to say. She was silent for a long time again, then asked, "Why don't you leave? Do you want me to treat you to a meal?" It's ridiculous to say that in the 3 years she had been in the Qin family and as Qin Zan's wife, they had never eaten together at the same table. Now that we are divorced, there is no need for this. Faced with Zhuang's order to expel him, Qin Zan felt inexplicably uncomfortable. He was so angry that he almost said something irreparable to Zhuang Ji. However, when the words came to his lips, Qin Zan swallowed them back. Without saying another word, he stood up from his chair and strode out. Zhuang Ji frowned and looked at his back, feeling very confused. Kai Yi had been waiting outside for quite a while. He originally wanted to open the door a crack to eavesdrop on what was being said inside, as he was afraid that his boss would suffer. However, Aikino didn't dare to do so. After all, he was afraid that if there were any scenes that were not suitable for minors, he would be embarrassed. This can't be blamed on Kai Yi's big imagination and rich associative ability. The truth is that Qin Zan even slept with Zhuang Ji after getting divorced, so it's hard for him not to think that Qin Zan can do even more outrageous things. However, as soon as the door of the box opened, Kai Yi saw Qin Zan coming out with a gloomy face, and he felt secretly happy. He walked in and started to flatter Zhuang Ji without knowing anything. "That's great, boss. You've made Qin Zan really mad this time. You must be in a better mood now, right?" Kai Yi said. Zhuang Ji raised his eyelids and looked at Kai Yi. He really didn't understand how he came to this conclusion. She was not angry with Qin Zan. Seeing this, Kai Yi knew that he was overthinking and quickly changed the subject. "Boss, I'll ask someone to bring the porridge first, and then I'll go buy 2 sheep's trotters. Please wait for me." As he said that, Kai Yi was about to run out but was stopped by Master Zhuang Ji. "No need, just eat the porridge. Barbecue is something that only tastes good for the first bite, and there's nothing special about it after that." She's not a person who cares about food, so there's no need to let Kai Yi go through it again. Aikino no longer insisted and asked the waiter to bring the porridge. He took a skewer of grilled butter and started eating. He was really hungry. He hadn't even had dinner and had been waiting for Zhuang Ji to come. Chapter 26 Why are you talking so much? Hua Zhongxian acted quickly. In just 3 days, he had built a new laboratory. All the equipment Qin Zan had sent was disinfected and put into use. Zhuang Ji entered the laboratory that evening and devoted himself to the research. This time, Kai Yi went in with her, and they did not come out of the laboratory until the evening of the next day, a full 21 hours. When they came out of the laboratory, Kai Yi's steps were a little unsteady. Ever since he started doing research with Zhuang Ji, he knew that Zhuang Ji was a king of papers. In the beginning, he was quite unconvinced, thinking that if a woman like Zhuang Ji could do it, there was no reason why he couldn't do it. Later, he was severely slapped in the face, as facts proved that Zhuang Ji could really make him see stars. After they changed their clothes and came out of the research institute, Kai Yi was about to ask Zhuang Ji what he wanted to eat. He urgently needed to eat something to replenish his energy, otherwise, he might not be able to see the boss he admired tomorrow. However, before he could even ask the question, Kai Yi saw that Zhuang Ji's brows were tightly knitted together and his entire demeanor was very low. Without asking, Kai Yi knew that Zhuang Ji was dissatisfied with the experiment. Even though they have replaced the most advanced equipment, their current progress is still 0. If Kai Yi had not already gotten used to this kind of situation with Zhuang Ji, he would have been devastated. After thinking for a while, Kai Yi said to Zhuang Ji, "Boss, you said that experiments are not something that can be rushed. Let's rest for a night and continue tomorrow. We will always find a breakthrough." Zhuang Ji naturally understood this principle, but what she cared more about was that the data analyzed from more sophisticated equipment did not bring any new findings. This might be a reminder to her that she should change her way of thinking. After a long silence, Zhuang Ji said to Kai Yi, "You go back and rest. I'll go to the hospital." She needed to take another blood sample from Li Yang to get the latest pathological manifestations. Kai Yi was completely convinced. The boss who devoted himself to the research was really formidable. He actually missed the 3 years that Zhuang Ji spent in the Qin family. At least, she didn't have to devote herself to the experiment and forget about food and sleep. After struggling for a while, Kai Yi said, "Boss, our sister should have rested by now, why don't you go tomorrow?" He was mainly afraid that Zhuang Ji would go back to the laboratory directly after drawing blood without taking a rest. "Then do you still want her body?" Zhuang Ji glanced at him and said, "She rests 24 hours a day. I won't disturb her if I go there at any time." Kai Yi scratched the back of his head, and an idea suddenly came to him. He said to Zhuang Ji cleverly, "Boss, don't you think that just drawing our sister's blood for research might not be enough? Since old lady Qin has the same symptoms as our sister, perhaps we can use her blood for research. Who knows, we might find something unexpected." Zhuangji chuckled when he heard this and said, "You and I are thinking the same thing. I plan to go to the Qin family after I go to their hospital." Aikino. Well, he still had to go to the hospital, and he still didn't go to rest. He even insisted on giving him another place to go. Kai had an urge to hit himself to death. Why did he keep talking so much? Kai said, "Then I will go with you." If they were just going to their hospital, that would be another matter, but if they were going to Qin's house, Kai had to follow them, otherwise, he was afraid that Zhuangji would be bullied in Qin's house. Zhuangji said, "If you really want to help, go back and rest." Chapter 27 Something to talk about. In the end, Zhuangji did not let Kai follow her and drove to the hospital by herself. When she arrived at the hospital, it was just past 7 in the evening. Coincidentally, Jing Yuker had just returned from dinner and came over to check on Li Yang's condition. Seeing her push the door open, Jing Yuker said, "You suddenly come over so frequently, it makes me so stressed." Zhuangji knew he was joking, so he glanced at him, walked to Li Yang's bedside, and said, "I'm just here to take a sample. If you say so, I'll live here from now on. Then I welcome it. I can see my junior sister every day, and it makes me feel good." Jing Yuker said. Zhuangji couldn't stand his deliberately greasy words, so he ignored him and went straight to draw Li Yang's blood. When she rolled up Li Yang's sleeves and saw the needle marks and bruises on the back of Li Yang's hands and arms, her eyes dimmed a lot. Seeing this, Jing Yuker said, "This is already a lot better. Let's all work harder and she will get better." Zhuangji knew that Jing Yuker was comforting him, so he adjusted his breathing and continued with his actions. After drawing 3 tubes of blood, Zhuangji pulled up Li Yang's sleeves, discussed with Jing Yuker, and then left the hospital. After coming out of Ankang Hospital, Zhuangji did not go directly to the villa, but called Qin Zan. The moment the call was connected, Zhuangji couldn't help but complain in his heart that this divorce seemed like a fake. He had never seen an ex-wife calling her ex-husband every day after the divorce. Not only Zhuangji thought so, even Qin Zan was quite surprised when he received Zhuangji's call. It was not difficult to hear the doubt in his voice, although he was always cold and indifferent, and only said 2 words, "What's the matter?" Zhuangji said, "I need to go to the villa to take a blood sample from old Madam Qin. Please arrange it." Qin Zan asked directly, "Where are you? I'll pick you up." "No need," Zhuangji refused subconsciously, "I can come here by myself." Qin Zan said, "Address." He was not the kind of person who would waste time talking to Zhuangji, and once he made a decision, he usually would not give people a chance to refuse. Although Zhuangji was a little unhappy, he still told Qin Zan the address. Half an hour later, a convoy drove up, and then there was a knock on Zhuangji's car window. Cheng Wei stood beside the car and said to her, "Miss Zhuang, Brother Zan is in the car behind. I'll drive your car." Zhuangji couldn't help but frown. He really didn't want to ride in the same car with Qin Zan. Cheng Wei seemed to see what Zhuangji was thinking, and immediately said, "Brother Zan has something to discuss with Miss Zhuang. This way, there is even less reason to refuse." Zhuangji had no choice but to get out of the car and walk to the car Qin Zan was riding in. The driver had already opened the back door, and Zhuangji sat in. He saw Qin Zan wearing a dark green suit, with long legs wrapped in suit pants, which made Zhuangji see a different kind of beauty in him. Realizing that she was distracted, Zhuangji despised herself in her heart. What kind of crazy girl is that? No matter how attractive these legs were, they had nothing to do with her. Sitting in the car, Zhuangji was almost pressed against the door, and there was still room for 2 more people between him and Qin Zan. Qin Zan was really upset by Zhuangji's deliberate distance. He frowned slightly and said in a cold voice, "What do you want to do with the blood?" Chapter 28 Contrast Differences. Hearing this, Zhuangji turned his head to look at Qin Zan and said, "Compare the symptoms of old Madam Qin and Li Yang." Qin Zan said, "Don't forget, now you should give priority to researching medicine for my grandma." These words were really unpleasant to Zhuangji's ears. She looked at Qin Zan, and suddenly a ball of anger rose up in her heart. "What do you mean? Do you think I'm here to draw blood for my sister?" Zhuangji was so angry at Qin Zan that he almost vomited blood. Qin Zan looked at her like a little lion with its fur standing on end. If possible, she would probably wave her claws at him. He said, "The reaction was so big, I hit the nail on the head." Parking. Zhuang was really pissed off by Qin Zan. She was too lazy to talk nonsense with him anymore, and she didn't want to be in the same space with him, otherwise, she might really attack him. It was her fault. She should have listened to Kai Yi's advice and gone back to rest instead of being questioned by Qin Zan in such a bad way. This was simply a humiliation for her. The driver did not stop the car but continued to drive forward steadily, which made Zhuang even more annoyed. She stared at Qin Zan, her face darkening. "Qin Zan, tell him to stop the car." Qin Zan ignored Zhuang request and just met Zhuang gaze. Then, he said something that made Zhuang even angrier. He said, "Zhuang, do you know what you look like? You look like a thief with a guilty conscience." Zhuang blood boiled and he was so angry at Qin Zan that his body was shaking slightly. After a long while, Zhuang said, "Trust the people you employ, and don't employ the people you doubt. Since you doubt my intentions so much, I think there is no need for us to continue our cooperation. I have already used the equipment you sent, and I will compensate you according to the market price." After saying that, Zhuang turned his head to look at the driver and said, "If you don't want me to open the door and jump out of the car now, just stop the car." The driver remained motionless and drove steadily no matter how Zhuang threatened him. Zhuang face became even uglier. At this moment, he had only one thought: Qin Zan and the people under him were the same, they were all sick. There was another long silence, and Zhuang became more and more impatient. She didn't really open the door and jump out of the car. These words were just a threat. How could she not know that the car door was locked and she couldn't open it at all? Just then, Zhuang cell phone rang. She took her cell phone out of her bag and looked at the caller ID. Her fingers stiffened involuntarily. The caller was Granny Wen. The fact that she called at this time gave Zhuang a bad feeling. She had called Granny Wen before going to Ankang Hospital, and also talked with Zhuang for a long time. According to convention, Zhuang should have been ready to go to bed, but Granny Wen suddenly called her, which meant something had happened. Without further delay, Zhuang answered the phone. On the other side, Granny Wen said to Zhuang anxiously, "Ji, you suddenly had a high fever and vomited 3 times. He is now unconscious. I am sending him to the hospital now. Come quickly." Zhuang heart tightened in an instant, and her hand holding the phone was shaking. She was about to force the driver to stop the car when she heard Qin Zan ask, "Which hospital?" Zhuang stared at him for a long time, but finally did not confront him at this time and told Qin Zan the name of the hospital. The next second, Zhuang heard Qin Zan asking the driver to turn around. Chapter 29: Genetic Disease. Ningchun Third Hospital. Zhuang hurried towards the emergency room and saw Granny Wen sitting on the ground from a distance, holding a string of Buddhist beads in her hand and muttering something. She ran over, and the sound of her footsteps attracted Granny Wen's attention. When Granny Wen saw Zhuang coming, she held her arm tightly and said, "Ji, it's all my fault. I didn't take good care of you. It's all my fault." Zhuang held back his anxiety, helped Granny Wen up from the ground, and said, "Granny Wen, don't say that. I know how good you are to you. Tell me first, what happened? Why did you suddenly fall ill?" She had gone to see Zhuang 2 days ago, and she was absolutely sure that Zhuang was in good health at that time and had no health problems at all. Granny Wen said, "I don't know either. After I gave him a bath, I thought he was asleep, so I went to wash his clothes. While I was washing, I heard a noise. When I went over to see, he had vomited all over the floor. When I touched his body, it was burning hot, so I called an ambulance. Before the ambulance arrived, he vomited twice more. I really don't know the specific reason." As she spoke, Granny Wen's eyes turned red. She has been taking care of Zhuang since he was 2 months old. He had never had any problems before. Now he has suddenly become like this after being taken care of by her. She feels really sad. Zhuang was very anxious, but he also heard from Grandma Wen's words that it was impossible to find out what was going on now. All she could do now was wait for the doctor to come out and inform them of the details. This process is the most torturous. She and Granny Wen sat on the bench, staring at the indicator light of the emergency room. After an unknown amount of time, the light finally went out and the doctor came out. Zhuang quickly stood up and went forward to greet him. She heard the doctor first say, "We detected pesticides in the patient's body." Zhuang was extremely surprised, and Granny Wen swayed and almost fell to the ground again. She pursed her lips and murmured, I clearly put the insecticide in a high cabinet, how could it be? The most important thing is that she found that when Zhuang Yu was vomiting, he didn't see the bottle of insecticide at all, so naturally she didn't associate it with this aspect. Zhuang Ji looked at the doctor, waiting for his next words. The doctor continued, the amount of pesticide was not large. We have already cleared it. There is no need to worry about it. Zhuang Ji nodded and thanked the doctor. Grandma Wen finally breathed a sigh of relief. If something really happened to Zhuang Yu, she would not be able to survive. Fortunately, Zhuang Yu is fine. However, the next second, the two heard the doctor say, but we detected two abnormalities in the patient's blood. The specific cause is still unclear and further observation and testing are needed. Zhuang Ji's heart, which had just been relieved, was lifted up again in an instant. She looked at the doctor and asked, which two data are they? Can you show them to me? This news was really hard for Zhuang Ji to accept. She had Zhuang Yu tested shortly after he was born, and all the indicators shown at the time were normal. How could there suddenly be two abnormalities? The doctor showed the report to Zhuang Ji. It is not certain whether these two data are caused by pesticides or the patient himself. We need to conduct another test. Chapter 30 So cheap. Zhuang Ji looked at the two pieces of data on the report and his nerves tensed up in an instant. The reason was simple. She had already determined that this was not caused by pesticides, but a genetic disease. Zhuang Ji's hands were shaking as she held the report. She couldn't accept that her child had a genetic disease. The doctor didn't know Zhuang Ji's identity, nor did he know that she had seen things beyond conventional medicine. He thought she was just scared and stupid. Seeing her young age, he couldn't bear it, so he comforted her, don't worry too much, maybe it's just caused by pesticides. We will know the answer after another examination. Zhuang Ji felt his kindness, smiled at him gratefully, and said, thank you, doctor. She didn't say much, because it was clear that genetic diseases were a barrier to traditional medicine, and it couldn't be explained in a few words. Moreover, even if she explained it, it would be a fantasy to the doctor. So, in order to avoid unnecessary trouble, Zhuang Ji said nothing. After thanking the doctor again, Zhuang Ji prepared to arrange for Zhuang Yu to be hospitalized first. It was at this time that she realized that Qin Zan had not left, and he was actually always not far away. The moment Zhuang Ji turned around and saw Qin Zan, she was totally unable to explain her feelings, so much so that she stood still for a long time, unable to move. After a while, Zhuang Ji walked towards Qin Zan and stood in front of him. Zhuang Ji said, thank you for sending me here. I can't go to draw blood today. You can go back first. Qin Zan's face did not look good, it could even be described as terrifyingly gloomy. But Zhuang Ji had no time to care about him at the moment. Qin Zan was already furious at Zhuang Ji for hiding the fact that he had a child, and now he was even more furious when he heard this. The first thing he blurted out was, this is how you do things. You can let any little thing take a backseat to your research. Zhuang Ji, it's hard for me to believe that you can make a new drug if you do things this way. Zhuang Ji was dumbfounded by Qin Zan's words. She couldn't believe what she heard. Zhuang Ji was so angry that his chest heaved. He tried to calm down for a long time before saying, a small matter. Could it be that in your heart, only your grandmother's life is life, and my son's life is not life? Qin Zan's face darkened, and he said again, you little bastard with unknown origins have no right to be compared with my grandmother. He checked and found that even Zhuang Ji himself didn't know who the father of the child was. If he wasn't a bastard, then what else could he be? Bang! Zhuang Ji couldn't bear it any longer, so he raised his hand and slapped Qin Zan in the face. Her body was shaking and her eyes were red. At this moment, she truly hated Qin Zan. Hated him for being so vicious, hated him for humiliating her child like that. Zhuang Ji gritted her teeth and didn't let herself say anything. She stared at Qin Zan for a long time and said, get out of here. I don't want to see you again. After saying this, Zhuang Ji strode away without even looking at Qin Zan. Qin Zan raised his hand and wiped the corner of his mouth, and there were drops of blood that he wiped away. He didn't know that Zhuang Ji was so strong that he could hit him so hard that the corner of his mouth was cracked. Cheng Wei was extremely worried and had no idea how things turned out like this. Suddenly a cell phone rang. It was Qin Zan's phone. He took out his phone and answered it. A joking voice came from the other end, why didn't you try on the best man suit with me and just let me beat you up? Why didn't I realize you were such a jerk before? Chapter 31 Solving Problems. Qin Zan's face darkened. If it weren't for their years of brotherhood, he would have hung up the phone by now. The other party didn't hear Qin Zan's voice, so he guessed that he was angry, so he said, "You'd better come back, we are all waiting for you." Qin Zan responded and hung up the phone. Cheng Wei heaved a sigh of relief when he saw Qin Zan walking out. Although he didn't know who had spread the news here, he was still grateful to the other party for preventing Brother Zan from continuing to be angry here. The two returned to the studio. Yi Qingqing's eyes fell on Qin Zan's face. He clicked his tongue twice and said, "This is even more exaggerated than what was captured in the video. You just endured it like this without even trying to dodge." Qin Zan frowned and glared at Yi Qingqing when he heard this. Before he could speak, he heard Yi Qingqing say, "I didn't ask anyone to follow you. It just happened that someone saw you." As he spoke, Yi Qingqing handed over his phone. The interface on it happened to be a chat record between him and a person. Qin Zan recognized the other party from the avatar, Nai Jing, Yi Qingqing's cousin, with whom he was not very familiar. The video just happened to capture the place where Zhuang slapped him. Judging from the video, Nai Jing was quite far away from them, but the sound of the slap was clearly audible. One can imagine how ruthless Zhuang was. Qin Zan's face turned even darker and he handed the phone back to Yi Qingqing. His face still ached slightly, and Qin Zan sat on the sofa with his arms folded, his eyes filled with turbulent thoughts. Seeing this, Yi Qingqing lowered his voice and asked, "Does Zhuang really have a son and is cheating on you?" Even though he had lowered his voice, and even though there were only him, Qin Zan and Cheng Wei in the lounge, when this question was asked, Cheng Wei couldn't help but take a deep breath and glance at Qin Zan's face with some worry. Yi Qingqing heard Cheng Wei's voice, looked towards him and said, "Why are you so nervous?" "I'm here to help you, Brother Zan, solve your problems, you know." Cheng Wei really wanted to go over and cover Yi Qingqing's mouth. He should shut up, didn't he see that Brother Zan's face had gotten even darker? Yi Qingqing looked at Qin Zan again and said, "Tell me, this is such a big thing, and you don't know anything about it. Is Zhuang making fun of you?" Qin Zan glared at Yi Qingqing irritably and said, "If you don't want to get married, just say so." Yi Qingqing made a tsk sound and said, "What kind of dog temper do you have? I'm just trying to help you solve the problem, but you're acting like I gave birth to your child behind your back." Cheng Wei stood up suddenly and said to Qin Zan and Yi Qingqing, "Brother Zan, Brother Cheng, I remembered that I have something to deal with. I'll go make a phone call." After saying that, he walked out of the lounge. He didn't want to be in the same room with them at all. Qin Zan was already angry enough, and Yi Qingqing kept adding fuel to the fire, fearing that Qin Zan would be mad to death. Although it was a little bit unkind, he still felt that it would be better to stay away from this place of trouble as soon as possible. After Cheng Wei left, Yi Qingqing complained, "We haven't fought each other, what is he afraid of?" Qin Zan raised his eyelids and glanced at Yi Qingqing, saying, "He is not afraid, but simply annoyed by you." Yi Qingqing sneered. Considering that Qin Zan had been slapped today, he was not going to bother with him. Putting aside his impropriety, Yi Qingqing asked, "Is it really impossible to find out whose child that child is?" Chapter 32 Mental Disability. Qin Zan became very upset whenever he mentioned that child. He let out a response from his nose, and it was not difficult to hear how unhappy he was. Yi Qingqing asked, "Have you checked the men around him?" The answer is obvious. Qin Zan has checked it. How could he allow himself to be a fool with black eyes? But that's where the problem lies. Qin Zan said, she herself doesn't know whose child she gave birth to. This was what annoyed Qin Zan the most. He simply didn't understand what Zhuang was thinking. She didn't even know who he had had sex with or whose child she was pregnant with, yet she dared to give birth to the child and raise it to this age. It was hard for him not to curse Zhuang, idiot. Yi Qingqing guessed Qin Zan's thoughts and said, "There are only a few reasons why a woman is willing to have a child. Apart from the traditional reason of continuing the family line, the first possibility that can make a woman willing to give birth to a child is that she loves the man so much that she is willing to go through the gates of hell and give birth to a child for him." As Yi Qingqing spoke, Qin Zan's face became even uglier. Yi Qingqing looked at Qin Zan with interest and said, "But according to what you said, Zhuang doesn't even know who the other party is, so this possibility is not true." Qin Zan's expression eased a little, and he regained his sanity, hearing the joking in Yi Qiancheng's words. He glanced at him and suddenly really wanted to fight him. Yi Qiancheng met Qin Zan's gaze with amusement and continued, since the first possibility is not true, then the second possibility is a bit uncomfortable. He deliberately didn't say it directly, but kept it in suspense to create just the right atmosphere. Qin Zan was even more speechless, and his eyes were filled with impatience. Yi Qiancheng knew that this was Qin Zan's limit. If he continued, he would really get angry. He said directly, perhaps it was because of Zhuang's physical condition that she couldn't have an abortion and had to give birth to the child. Qin Zan's eyes darkened. He could not accept Yi Qiancheng's guess. If this was the reason, then what he had said to Zhuang before was indeed too much. Yi Qiancheng observed Qin Zan's expression and shook his head in his heart. After a long silence, Yi Qiancheng said, to be honest, since the child was born before Zhuang married you, there is no need for you to be angry, and she did not cheat on you during her marriage. Qin Zan's expression, which had just relaxed, darkened again because of Yi Qiancheng's words. However, Yi Qiancheng deliberately wanted to explain the little trick behind this to him. Yi Qiancheng said, the most important point is that you didn't get married willingly. Now you're divorced. Why do you care who she gave birth to a child with? Have you thought clearly about why you're so angry? Qin Zan's lips were tight, and he couldn't answer Yi Qiancheng's question. Yi Qiancheng didn't need him to answer. He had already curled his lips slightly, leaned back on the sofa, and said clearly, you like her. Qin Zan's eyes darkened, he stood up from the sofa and said coldly, I'll go change my clothes. He was still wearing the groomsmen's suit he was trying on, and when he got the call from Zhuang, he went straight there without even changing his clothes. As a result, he came back very angry, and the more he thought about it, the more upset he felt. Chapter 33 What's there to think about? Yi Qiancheng said, it just so happens that they later chose the blue one. You can try it, and if there is no problem, you can just book it. Qin Zan felt a headache. He really didn't understand why Yi Qiancheng wanted to make the best man so fancy. The most important thing was, he had already been married and divorced, but he still insisted on letting him be the best man. He was really brave. After Qin Zan left, Yi Qiancheng picked up his phone and sent a message to his fiancée. Soon, Yi Qiancheng's fiancée Guan Mengwu walked in. She sat down next to Yi Qiancheng, her beautiful figure perfectly outlined by the aqua-green cheongsam. Yi Qiancheng unconsciously put his arms around her slender waist, pulled her into his arms, and asked in a sticky voice, did you miss me? Just now, in order to have a good talk with Qin Zan, Yi Qiancheng asked Guan Mengwu and the others to rest in another lounge. Guan Mengwu glanced at Yi Qiancheng coquettishly and said, it's only been more than half an hour, what is there to think about? Upon hearing this, Yi Qiancheng began to play tricks on Guan Mengwu's waist with his big hand, saying unhappily, but I miss you so much. 1 second of not seeing you feels like 3 years. Just count how many years it has been. Guan Mengwu felt extremely uncomfortable with his words, especially the hand on her waist which she could not ignore. She reached out to pull the hand away, but she was no match for Yi Qiancheng. Hey, stop bothering me. Guan Mengwu felt itchy and numb because of him, and begged for mercy with a trembling voice. Yi Qiancheng would never let go of such a good opportunity. He leaned over to Guan Mengwu's neck and kissed her, and then negotiated with her, if you promise to let me do whatever I want when I go back, I will not make trouble for you. Guan Mengwu was so embarrassed by him that she couldn't avoid him. In the end, she had no choice but to agree. Yi Qiancheng was satisfied and stopped making trouble. He changed the subject and said to Guan Mengwu, baby, help me with something. When Guan Mengwu heard that he suddenly became serious, she sat up straighter and asked, what's the matter? Yi Qiancheng said, help me make friends with someone. Although Yi Qiancheng couldn't figure out when Qin Zan fell in love with Zhuang, now that he knew about it, as a brother, how could he not help his brother? He wanted to find out more about Zhuang's background. If she dared to hurt his brother, he would not forgive her. Guan Mengwu didn't know what Yi Qiancheng was planning. She was used to listening to Yi Qiancheng, so she agreed without even thinking about it. Okay. Yi Qiancheng liked her gentle and considerate appearance the most, and kissed her hard on the cheek. Baby, you make me love you to death. Guan Mengwu grumbled and said, let's go back to the next door. Everyone is still waiting. Yi Qiancheng naturally would not refuse Guan Mengwu's wish. He hugged her, stood up, and walked out of the lounge. Coincidentally, Qin Zan had already changed his clothes and went to another lounge with them. Those who came today were Yi Qinchang and Guan Mengwu's best men and bridesmaids. The best men's suits have been decided to be blue, but the bridesmaids' dresses have not yet been decided because Guan Mengwu does not want the bridesmaids to be her foils at her wedding, but hopes that everyone is beautiful in their own way. But it seems that it is not easy to move to this point, because many stores think that bridesmaids are there to set off the bride, and thus design bridesmaid dresses very ugly. As a result, Guan Mengwu has been selecting for a long time and still hasn't found the one she likes.